Mr. Mayor, we are live.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the October 13, 2020 City Council special video meeting. I'm Mayor Benson Wong. Prior to tonight's virtual City Council meeting, Council held executive session for about 60 minutes to discuss with legal counsel pending or potential litigation pursuant to RCW 42.30.110, paren 1, close paren, small I, close paren, using video conferencing technology provided by Microsoft Teams. No action was taken. Tonight's City Council meeting is using video conferencing technology provided by Zoom. The Zoom video of this meeting is being broadcast live and will be uploaded to the city's YouTube channel later this evening. City Manager Jesse Bond, City Attorney Beal Park, and several other staff members are participating in tonight's meeting. I see that City Manager is in the City Chamber, Council chambers, and others will be participating remotely. Public audience members are also listening to the meeting by using telephone or via the internet. Welcome to all, and thank you for joining us tonight. Council members, please ensure that your microphones are turned on for the roll call. City Clerk, Deb Estrada, please take the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mayor Benson Wong.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Wendy Weicker.
Here.
Councilmember Lisa Anderall.
Here, thank you.
Councilmember Jake Jacobson.
Here.
Councilmember Salim Neese.
Here.
Councilmember Craig Reynolds.
Here.
And Councilmember Dave Rosenbaum.
Here.
Thank you all.
Great, thanks. We now move to our first item of business, which is to approve the agenda. Before entertaining this motion, I want to state that Governor Inslee's proclamation, number 28-28.11, regarding the Open Public Meetings Act, extends the statutory waivers and suspensions now through November 9. Council may have a motion to approve the agenda tonight.
So moved.
Okay, I think it was probably moved by Councilmember Jacobson and seconded by Councilmember Neese to approve the agenda. City Clerk, please conduct the roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Anderall.
Aye.
Councilmember Jacobson.
Aye.
Councilmember Neese.
Oh my God.
Aye.
Blue case.
Councilmember Reynolds.
Aye.
Councilmember Rosenbaum.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Weicker.
Aye.
And Mayor Wong.
Aye. Motion passes and the agenda is approved. For this meeting, we continue obviously to utilize the Zoom platform. Council members, if you have a question, please use the raise your hand feature. I'll do my best to recognize the hands in the order that they are raised. After you've been recognized, you may ask your question. Please try to limit yourself to one question and one clarifying question if necessary, so that each council member is afforded an opportunity to ask a question before a council member gets a second chance. Tonight's agenda will not include in-person public appearances in accordance with the governor's proclamation and extended safe start order. However, individuals wishing to speak live during the appearances portion of our meeting may do so by telephone or using the Zoom teleconferencing application, provided, however, they register their desire to speak with the city clerk's office by 4 p.m. Today. Our city clerk will call your name and telephone number when it's your turn to speak. This is your opportunity to speak to the entire city council on any item. All remarks will be addressed to the council as a whole and not to any individual council member or staff member. If a person makes personal, impertinent, or slanderous remarks, or becomes boisterous, threatening, or personally abusive while addressing the council, I may ask that the person leave the meeting. When it's your turn to address the council, be sure to speak audibly and state your name for the record. Your comments will be limited to 3 minutes, and I will provide you with a 30-second warning when your time is about to expire. City Clerk, has anybody signed up to speak before the council?
No, sir, nobody has signed up for this evening.
Okay. There being no appearances, we now move to our special business. We only have one item of special business tonight, and that's Agenda Bill 5765. There is no action by the City Council required tonight. Instead, we are receiving and beginning our discussion and deliberations over the 2021-2022 preliminary budget. And to lead us in this discussion is going to be City Manager Jesse Vaughn and Interim Finance Director Matt Mornick.
Good evening, Council. I note Mayor Wong said we only have one item tonight. That is not implying it will be a short meeting. So joining me tonight, you don't see their screens right now. We have the entire leadership team, certainly led by the budget presentation led by our Interim Finance Director, Matt Mornick, and our Deputy Finance Director, Lawan Tuttle. So they'll be coming in and out of the meeting as the presentation proceeds. I am driving the PowerPoint from council chambers, which is always interesting when we have multiple presenters. So we'll do our best. And let me start by sharing our screen here. Okay. Again, good evening. It's Tuesday, October 13th. This is part one of a two-part budget presentation, Council. I don't anticipate getting through this entire slide deck tonight, although if anybody feels like being an overachiever, that would be fantastic. We will be carrying on into the October 20th meeting a week from today. Tonight, we've broken the presentation up into these categories. I'll start with just a high-level overview, talk a little bit about what informed my budget strategy in preparing this document for you. Matt's going to talk about budget basics. I know a number of you reached out and said, hey, we've got some questions about how the funds work. We got some emails today as well. Please stop us where you have questions. Municipal budgeting is sometimes it's very complicated. So we want to make sure you all have a solid foundation as you work through your policy deliberations and ultimately decisions. We have one slide, which is the 5-year forecast. I'll do a quick highlight of the budget proposals. And then we're planning to go department by department this evening. And that's where I indicated we may not get through all of the departments tonight. I'm planning for a few of them to be next week. So let's dive in. Mayor Wong, Matt Mornick and I did talk about some natural breaks in the presentation. So I will assure you we will take pauses and happy to field questions.
Great.
Budget overview, where are we in the process? October 13th. September 1st, I will remind you, the finance team provided you with a revenue forecast that we've used as the foundation to develop the 21-22 budget. On September 22nd, nobody forgot that presentation. We presented the proposed organizational chart and the changes. And as you all know, there have been a lot of changes due to the pandemic and restructuring. On October 1st, we transmitted the budget to you officially, although I think your notebooks were available the night before. And now we are beginning what will be, looks like a 5-council meeting review and discussion on the budget. Reminder, this is part one. Part two is next week, where we will finish your department discussions and we will also talk about the capital program. And just a preview, Council, if the pandemic had not happened this year, the capital program budget would have been done in the spring. But here we are. For future biennial budgets, I do recommend trying to get the capital program done first. It takes a little pressure off of this fall budget discussion. November 2nd, I've had a lot of questions about this. We need a dedicated council meeting to talk through your budget proposals. That's intended to happen at November 2nd's meeting. November 17th is when you'll adopt your 2021 ARCH budget, set your property tax levy, and approve your NORCOM and utility rates. And then with all of that input and feedback finalized, we will prepare your final budget document for adoption on December 1st. So that's the schedule, a lot of work to do. Councilmember Jacobson always reminds me, get to the punchline. So Here is a snapshot of your 21-22 proposed revenues. So across all funds, it's 148.6 million. This is by fund, so we've grouped the funds together. Your general purpose funds, which include your general fund, is at 60.7 million. And we will talk about these fund types in a little more detail in just a minute. Expenditures by fund, the snapshot over the next biennium is 142.4 million. And now you're thinking, this probably doesn't mean a lot to me until we get into the details, so we will go there in just a moment. Probably what you're most interested in is, for example, the general fund, which is where we've experienced fiscal challenges for a while. Your general fund expenditures, which we'll be talking about tonight and next week, 29.2 million in 2021 and 29.6 million in 2022. The Youth and Family Services Fund, I'll just mention that I am planning to talk about the Youth and Family Services Department and the fund next week. And then I've already mentioned the capital improvement program with the expenditures listed there is also planned for next week. Moving right along, and I think I'm just going to keep going, Mayor, because those were high-level numbers. We'll be getting into next-level discussions here in just a moment. Council, what informed my budget strategy? I think you certainly know we've had a lot of changes in 2020 that we memorialized. It's a future-focused budget, really trying to point to where we're headed with the acknowledgement that we have more work to do. One of the examples I used often is the community center, recreation programs, art programs are not reflected as recovered yet in this budget, but we'll need to account for the planning and investment that needs to happen to get those services back online. This is a starting point. The city manager's budget is a handoff to you as a recommendation. This is your policy document, and you will likely make changes, and that's part of this process. I've already mentioned that we have a lot of transition work still ahead. Certainly the recreation division, the thrift shop, even the planning department is in transition right now. I'm not a very conservative person by nature, but I have to tell you, this is a conservative budget. And that one of the questions is it too conservative? I welcome your feedback and discussion as we go forward. Again, it's your policy document. We're happy to explain how we derive the numbers. And remember, if you decide to stick with a conservative approach and recovery happens faster than we expected, you can always amend your budget, in the next biennium. So the numbers you see, relatively flat. This probably doesn't come as a surprise to you. We've been talking about this for a while. Really focusing on core services and maintaining our emergency efforts. That the pandemic is still with us. It will be for a while. That means we have to dedicate services and staffing. Every part of our city operation is modified because of the pandemic. We have reorganized the departments. I went through that in great detail on September 22nd. Certainly as we get into the department budgets, I'm happy to answer questions about the positions that are there, new positions that are proposed, and positions that are included as part of a budget proposal. We did look for opportunities to improve operations and efficiencies. One of the examples is centralizing customer service, and Allie Speetz will be talking about that in a little bit, so that we have a dedicated team answering all the phones that were ringing previously, and we can provide better customer service. No new tax proposals, although the budget does certainly assume a 1% property tax increase, which Matt will be talking about in the future. And we really tried to go with stability. So no additional layoffs or furloughs. I did have a question from a council member today that I think is worth mentioning. We have a number of staff that are in temporary positions. And the question was, are those staff guaranteed permanent positions? And the answer is no. Once your budget is adopted and I know what positions are funded, right? Because at this point, I don't have the answer to that question. We will then go through a recruitment process. And we're so fortunate that we've had a number of really talented staff assume temporary positions, they will be invited and encouraged to participate in that process. So I wanted to go ahead and answer that question here. And I've already said this, right? We are a city in transition. We have been greatly impacted by the pandemic, some financial struggles. I have pointed out that we are not there yet. We have more planning work to do, particularly in a couple of divisions. So, Council, I want to just mention, we had hopes and dreams of reformatting our budget document for this budget, and we shelved that idea several months ago. We just didn't have the capacity. And one of the things I'll note that isn't included in our budget is this assumptions information. And we caught it after we published, so we wanted to include it in here. We may put it into an appendix at the back or something. And in our future dreams, when we actually get time to do some reformatting of this budget, we will make sure all of this information is included. So what was missing from your budget is information about how salary and wages are devised and information about employee benefits. Our COLA is based on the CPIW, Seattle and Bellevue Semi-Annual Index. In most of our bargaining agreements, well, let me back up. In 3 of our bargaining agreements, fire, police, and police support, we've agreed to 100% of CPIW or a 1.9% COLA in 2021. Your budget includes an estimate of 2.2% in 2022. The AFSCME union, that collective bargaining agreement sets the COLA at 90% of CPIW, which is 1.71% in 2021. And again, we've estimated 1.98 for 2022. Your non-represented staff typically receive the same COLA as AFSCME union members, so that would be at 90% of CPIW, and again, 1.71% in 2021, and 1.98 in 2022. As for employee benefits, and Lawan and Ali can answer questions about this if additional follow-up is needed. We're typically at this stage in the game receiving estimates as to what our medical premiums will be in the next year and the next biennium. So right now your budget is based on a 7 to 7.5% per year early estimate. Again, that could change. And dental premiums are estimated to increase 3% per year in the budget. One more slide and then we'll go ahead and take questions. Actually, 2 more slides, excuse me. So as we start to dive into the budget, one of the big questions and discussions we need to have is around the disposition of general fund surplus. So what you will note if you've looked at the general fund in detail is that your revenue estimates in 2021 and 2022 exceed your expenditure estimates in both fiscal years. So it's about $800,000 surplus projected in 21 and a little over $1 million in 2022. You're thinking, Jesse, that's a miracle. Actually, it's not a miracle. No miracles happening here. Those surpluses are the result of the community center, the recreation programs, and other service reductions that incurred in 2022 and were not yet included in the preliminary budget. So when we get to this later tonight, the recreation division right now is not budgeted for recovery. We need to build the recovery plan still. So as you're thinking about disposition of those funds, just remember we have those work items still looming. The general fund balance for one-time uses from prior years has carried over into the budget. This is mostly tied to an ending fund balance. I want to say it was a biennium ago, and we have about $3.5 million in 2021 in one-time funds that you may use to fund budget proposals or fund reserves or other things. We talked about these resources back in the spring when we were making reductions, and you had asked me, Jesse, why aren't we using those funds now? Well, the reason is because we knew at that point that we would be needing to talk about recovery planning for the recreation division, the thrift shop, and perhaps even the planning department. So those are key discussions we need to have. And speaking of questions, that's a good segue. I've just thrown some out here. You probably have more. We put together budget proposals for your considerations. It's probably not an exhaustive list. Oftentimes the council has their own wish list items to be funded. So we're looking for that, feedback and information now so that we can prepare for the November 2nd meeting. I will be looking for majority consensus from the council in terms of additional budget proposals we might prepare. A big question, what resources should be held in reserves to address future needs? The LEF 1 reserve has certainly been on our mind, but as I've already mentioned, we have recovery planning needs as well related to the pandemic. What other priorities are not reflected? Particularly in the work plans. This budget was prepared with both the financial component and very detailed department work plans so that when you adopt your budget, you have a roadmap for the work that's going to be done over the next 2 years. And certainly this question is for next week. What feedback do you have regarding the capital improvement program? And are you comfortable with our financing strategy? All right, at this point, I will, actually, let's stop here. I promised that I would take a break. Does anyone have any questions at this point about what I've presented so far?
I have not seen anybody's hand raised at this point.
Okay, let's go ahead and move forward then. I'll turn the presentation over to Matt. This is where we start to get a little more technical. And council, I do want to encourage you to ask questions. I understand fund accounting and our municipal budgeting is complex. So we want to make sure you have a good grasp of what these funds are. Matt?
We do have a question from Councilmember Reynolds.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I was slow on finding the raise hand button. A nit here, but I'm curious about the CPIW figures. First, can you clarify when you, I forgot the number now, 1.9% in 2021, does 2020 increase in CPIW that will be reflected in 2021 wages, or is it a year lag from that?
Councilmember Reynolds, I'm sorry, your microphone cut out on the last part of that question. Could you say that again?
Yeah, it is for the figures you're quoting for the CPIW, is that the rate, like if you say it's 1.9% in 2021, I forgot if that's what it was, but let's say it is that the amount of the increase in the CPIW during 2021 that drives 2022 wages, or is it the 2020 increase that drives 2021 wages?
It's Luan, see, this is the cue we have. When Luan turns on the screen, that means she should answer the question and I should not. Luan.
Hi, Luan Tuttle, your Deputy Finance Director. To answer that question, the 1.9% is the CPIW for the midpoint. So it's measured in June of 2020. So it's the half-year measurement for 2020, and it sets the CPI increase for 2021.
Okay, that's a perfect response. Thank you. The second clarifying question is, we saw an email from, I believe, Matt, maybe 3 or 4 days ago, suggesting that the CPIW was only about 0.5% or so. Was the, how do we reconcile that to the numbers here? Is it just the year earlier figure?
The CPIW is different from the implicit price deflator, which I believe is what Matt is talking about in regards to property tax.
Okay.
Different.
Thank you. And I will switch to using my external microphone and hope that helps for the future. We'll see.
All right.
City Manager, may I ask a clarifying question? Your slide number 12, I guess, can somebody point out where this $3.5 million in general fund balance, where is that in the notebook?
Sure. Actually, what I might suggest, Mr. Mayor, we are moving into the fund discussion. We will talk about ending fund balance, and Matt Mornick will cover that in detail, and we'll highlight it.
Great, thank you.
All right, let's see if I can get my share screen back here where we left off. Oh dear. Oh, there we go. Matt.
Okay, Council, good evening. Matt Mornick, your Interim Finance Director. We have varying levels of interest in and understanding of municipal finance. And so I appreciate your patience as we work through the next few slides, well, the next 15 to 20 slides, to cover some of the basics about Mercer Island's budget, starting with how the budget is organized. Next slide, please. Okay, so all city activities are organized on the basis of different funds, each of which is considered a distinct accounting entity. So the operations of each fund are accounted for with a separate set of self-balancing accounts that comprise its revenues, its expenditures, as well as its assets and liabilities. So the purpose of fund accounting is to protect public dollars and ensure that the resources that are meant for a specific purpose are accurately tracked. So the city has 19 active funds grouped into 7 categories as outlined on this slide. Next slide. So the term reserve and fund balance are often used interchangeably, and that can be confusing. When navigating the city's finances, I've come to think of fund balance as the unencumbered year-end balance of revenues minus expenditures within a specific fund. A reserve is a specific accounting entity to track dollars for a specific purpose within a fund. And so we have 3 types of reserves: working capital reserve, operating reserves, and capital reserves. Past administrations created 28 different reserves by setting aside dollars for cash flow purposes, for future expenses related to capital investments, or to address future accrued liabilities, such as the left one reserve. So this may seem like a lot of reserves, and it is, but it is smart fiscal management to have identified financial liabilities, operating challenges, or capital needs, and established funding mechanisms to address them. Next slide.
Matt, I just want to pop in here too, Council. You'll notice now as we start getting into the more technical slides, in the lower corner of the screen, you'll see, hopefully you can see a number. That is if the material on the screen is tied to a page in the budget notebook, that is your page number. All right. And by the way, just to make you a little crazy, we jump around a bit. So fair warning. Matt, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Jesse. The city's primary rainy day reserve is the Contingency Fund. In 2020, the City Council authorized the fund to be drawn down to help stabilize the organization through the pandemic. Current policy dictates that the fund be 12.5% of general fund expenditures, which is roughly 1.5 months of the general fund's operating costs. Next slide.
And Matt, let me just chime in here and say that our budget, actually you can answer a question for me. The forecast for the contingency fund in 2021 accounts for the allocations the council made in 2022, yes?
I'm sorry, in 2022?
I'm sorry, 2020.
Yes.
Yes, excellent, thank you. Council, I know we've had a couple of emails from several of you wanting to discuss the policy for the contingency fund balance, and that is totally appropriate. That's a great policy discussion. Matt, why don't you keep going?
Okay, this table illustrates 4 fiscal years of activity in the contingency fund. And so you have the revenues coming in and then the expenditures within the contingency fund in the top rows. But I would like you to focus your attention on the bottom 2 rows where we track the reserve amount at 12.5% and any reserve that is over or under the 12.5% threshold. Part of the reason why we see the contingency fund exceed the 12.5% threshold is because the contingency fund is benchmarked against general fund expenditures. And general fund expenditures in 2020 were significantly reduced.
Hold on. Hey, Ed, if we're getting some feedback from your mic, if you could go ahead and mute. Thank you. Go ahead, Matt.
Matt, can you just repeat what you just said?
So, okay, so part of the reason why we see the contingency fund exceed the 12.5% threshold is because the contingency fund is benchmarked against the general fund expenditures. And in 2020, general fund expenditures were significantly reduced. And so I'm happy to pause here and take questions on the slides we just covered.
We have a question from Councilmember Anderall.
Thank you. I think I'm having a hard time lining up the 2019 actual, 2020 forecast and the two budget numbers against what's in the paper book in front of me. Maybe I'm not, maybe they're, oh, go back, yeah, thanks. So yeah, that's the 2021 budget shows an over policy contingency reserve of $408,000. And yet what's in the paper book in front of me says $495,000.
Yep. Thank you, Councilmember. You're pointing out an adjustment that happened. The latest version of this table is on the PowerPoint presentation. We caught this after we published the budget book. This is an adjustment we plan to make, and I was going to walk you through that in future slides. So we found a couple errors, and we've addressed them, and we've got an eye on them. But that explains the mistake.
Okay, fantastic. I was just wondering if assumptions had changed or if there was just a math thing going on.
Thank you. Councilmember Reynolds.
Yeah, in the budget book, the revenues are identified, I believe, as associated with interest. That strikes me as a pretty significant interest rate. I'm guessing it's not just interest on the contingency fund, it's some other interest dropping in there. Can you clarify where that comes from?
Yes, Councilmember, that's correct. So the contingency fund it receives the primary revenue stream for the contingency fund is the city's interests across all funds. We have a variety of reserves that also receive interest, but the vast majority of that interest for all of the city's dollars goes to the contingency fund.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see anybody else's hand. I'm going to follow up on Councilmember Reynolds. So I take it the funds that our funds are invested in isn't in a state pool, or I mean, it's obviously not CD interest, it's something else.
That's correct. The local government investment pool.
And just as a follow-up, do we have an option as far as, whether or not our investment should be conservative or a little bit riskier, or is it just, do we have any choice, I guess, in how we invest that money? Or is it just dictated by the state?
Let's see, this might be a good question for Lawan.
Hi. We are limited in what we can invest in. There are restrictions, and I would have to get back to you on the details of those. I can tell you at this point, because of just staff capacity, most of the city's excess cash is sitting in the local government investment pool, and the interest rate is dropping monthly. We do have the ability to do outside investments within a limited rules, but again, it comes back to staff capacity and how we can do that at this point.
Okay, so there is some possible options we might have.
Yeah.
Councilmember
I will,
James.
Mayor Wong, I just want to add, although there's options that we could consider, we're fairly restricted because we have public dollars. So I don't want to leave the impression that we can start investing in the stock market.
Sure.
We're fairly restricted, and we'd be happy to follow up with you on the RCWs that provide guidance for this and other budgeting. I'm sure there's other budgeting regs as well.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Jacobson. Jake, you're mute right now. Councilmember Jacobson.
What happens to the, let me rephrase this. The contingency reserve indicates whether we're under or over our policy. And in three instances in this, on the chart on B10, I think it is, there are three instances where it's over and one where it's under. What then is done with those funds? Are they put into a reserve for the contingency?
Good question, council member. So according to council policy, any dollars that are above the target level for the contingency fund can go directly to the general fund balance.
Okay,
And
fine.
so we just need council to, as part of the preliminary budget adoption process, once we establish what the general fund expenditures are, then we know what our target balance is for the contingency fund. And per council's direction, any dollars that go above that stay within the general fund balance.
Got it, thanks.
I just wanted to share with the rest of the council that I was on a phone call this morning with some of the other mayors of the SCA North Caucus, and we were talking about budgets and contingent, well, I was kind of surprised because some of these other cities have a higher percentage than 12.5. A number of them have 15%, and one of them actually had 20%. So I just give you that by way of just context. And so anyway, that, again, I just wanted to share that information with you. Councilmember Rosenbaum.
Thanks. Matt, just a question on the contingency reserve spend down in the last year or so. Do you know what percentage of that was COVID related versus other feeds?
I would venture a guess that, and I can get hard numbers for you, but I would venture a guess that it was all COVID related.
And I would say that's true for 2020, but prior to 2020, obviously the spend down in 2019 is not COVID related.
Okay, thank you.
And actually, Lawan, since your screen is up there, I did want to ask a follow-up question regarding the over-under of the contingency fund. Council, one option you have when this happens is to change your policy. So if you want to retain those funds in the contingency fund, you can increase the percentage. But the auditor is keeping an eye on whether or not we're following a policy. And our policy, Lawan, I seem to recall that we got dinged for being over this previously. Am I recalling that correctly?
Yeah, the auditors will verify not only with our own policies, but they also looked at whether or not we were within the legal limit for the contingency fund, which is set by RCW and is a percentage of, or based on your assessed valuation. So I believe at the end of 18, we were overfunded in contingency fund specifically for both of those things. So we do have to keep in mind both of those limits.
So this is a item that will be part of our policy discussion in terms of what to do with this. Mr. Mayor, should we keep going, or is there another question?
Councilmember Jacobson, is this an old hand raised or? It is. Okay, go ahead, City Manager.
All right, Matt?
I just want to mention maybe Councilmember Reynolds raised your hand. Did you have a question?
Thank you. I actually had a couple of them. I actually hit the lower button instead of the raise. I'm having a hell of a time tonight. A couple of quick things. One, first to follow up on the mayor's question. Luan did not answer what I thought the question was, but I may have got it wrong, which is the local government investment pool. Is there just one local government pool, or can we choose between an aggressive local government pool and a conservative local government pool?
There is only one, and it's run by the state treasurer's office.
Okay. Second question is the contingency fund. Could we express the policy to be a target, so a flexible target, like our policy is to be between 11% and 14% or something like that to give it a little more flexibility, or do we have to have a hard number target?
It's your policy. It can be flexible.
Okay. And what I hope the final question on this is the fact that we're over limit with the state limits. Have we done the parallel calculation here to see if the target would put us over limit in the future with those state rules?
Yes.
Yeah,
And I take it would not,
correct.
So,
or at least according to the forecast.
yeah, of course. So for the year 2020, when you look at the state laws and calculate based on the city's total assessed valuation, the upper threshold maximum that we could have in our contingency fund would have been 18.6%.
Okay. And then I guess, sorry, one last question for the mayor. You mentioned these other cities that were at 15% or 20. Did any of them draw down that related to COVID-related effects?
I think a number of them were basically trying to resist going down for a variety of reasons. But I think there were just a general discussion regarding, I think they were just trying to resist drawing down too much, let's put it that way.
Okay, thank you.
And, you know, Council, just a reminder about the contingency fund draw in 2020, we expected it to be much higher than what was shown on the prior screen. However, we had a pleasant surprise, I think it was in May, when we found out we would be receiving over $700,000 in CARES Act funds, and we ended up using the CARES Act funds to support the EOC, and therefore our contingency fund need wasn't as great. Going forward, we're not sure if we'll receive additional federal funding, but I just wanted to share that reminder for the 2020 look back.
And if I may add a little bit more information to the mayor's point, for context, the city of Bellevue has a general fund balance that is their rainy day fund. And they benchmark the percent of their general fund balance to be 15% of general fund revenues. The city of Issaquah has the same general fund balance that serves as the city's rainy day fund, and they benchmark it as well at 15%. And at the beginning of 2020, their general fund balance was 27%. So other cities do have policies that have higher contingency balances.
Okay,
If there's no other questions, we'll keep moving.
No other questions right now.
Okay, so back to the fund categories. Of the 19 different funds in the city's budget, only general purpose funds have no external restrictions. So the city has placed internal restrictions on general purpose funds. For example, the city council determined that a main general purpose revenue, which is property tax, be allocated to the general fund, as well as 4 different funds and respective reserves within those funds. So that was an internal restriction on a general fund, a general purpose revenue. All of the other funds on this screen have external restrictions on how the resources within those funds can be used. And by that, I mean restrictions not set by the council, rather restrictions set by grant authorities or the state and federal government. And so we're going to go through each of the different fund categories, starting with general purpose. Next slide, please. Okay, so general purpose funds can be used for any city purpose, including operations and capital. The general fund supports the vast majority of city services, including police, fire, emergency medical services, parks and recreation, street and right-of-way maintenance, development services, legal, judicial, and financial services, as well as general administration of the organization. The self-insurance fund pays for insurance losses not covered by the city's $5,000 deductible or other insurance that the city may have. The Youth Services Endowment is a permanent fund in which the donated monies remain invested as principal and from which investment earnings are used to support ongoing youth and family service programs, which are accounted for in the Youth and Family Services Fund. So rules guiding management of the endowment fund were established internally. That's a good example of internal restrictions that are set on the fund. Next slide. The nature of a special revenue fund is that the dollars within these funds are restricted, committed, or assigned to a specific type of activity. The city has 4 special revenue funds, including the contingency fund. The intent of enterprise funds is to recover the costs of providing goods and services to the public on a continuing basis, primarily through user charges. So enterprise funds are managed like closed business entities, and the city has 3, which are the water, sewer, and stormwater funds. Next slide. Internal service funds are used to account for services provided between city departments. For example, the equipment rental fund accounts for the costs of maintaining and replacing all city vehicles. So Each department that uses a city vehicle is charged operating and maintenance rates, as well as replacement rates for those vehicles that have been used. Capital project funds are used to account for financial resources earmarked for the acquisition or construction of major capital facilities. And capital funds are separate from the operating budget. They're separate dollars and they're used for capital investments. So the internal service funds and the capital improvement funds are primarily in the city's 6-year capital improvement program. One more slide, and then I'll take some questions. So finally, we have debt service and trust funds. Debt service funds are used to track resources set aside to repay long-term debt principal and interest. And the city distinguishes between debt that is voted on by the general public versus debt that can be issued without a public vote, also known as cancel-manic bonds. So the city has no voted debt and has 3 non-voted limited tax general obligation bonds, one for the community center building, one for the South Center playfields, and one for Fire Station 92. The city's one trust fund is the firefighters pension fund, which accounts for all pension benefits for the firefighters that were hired before March 1st of 1970. So with that, I'm happy to open up questions regarding the city's funds.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Neese.
Thanks, Matt. I want to touch on 2, which is the debt and then the vehicle sinking fund. And I want to talk about the fire apparatus. So I understand that of the 4 fire apparatus, 1 is funded by a levy, right? And 3, I think, are financed by debt. Is that also right?
That sounds correct.
So when a vehicle is financed by debt, and we also have a sinking fund that is designed to take a payment from the general fund to replace an existing vehicle at the end of its service life, can you talk to me about the relationship between having debt, paying for an apparatus, and having a sinking fund that is meant to collect a payment for that apparatus replacement after its service life?
Sure. LaJuan can take that question, and she can also explain why we are using debt for the fire purchases, which largely has to do with the cost. LaJuan?
Sure. So just to be specific, the fire rescue truck was folded into the special levy that was passed, property tax levy lid lift that was passed to build and construct Fire Station 92, which is the South End Fire Station. So when we issued debt to build that fire station, we rolled in the cost of the fire rescue truck, and that's how that was purchased. So that will be paid off. That debt is paid off at the end of that special levy. And for that piece of equipment specifically, we have started also doing the sinking fund contributions for the next replacement cycle. Fire apparatus that are purchased via a capital lease. So you're seeing those on the debt schedules where we have long-term capital lease purchases for those larger fire apparatus. We are not contributing replacement contributions via a fleet replacement rate for those vehicles. Those are strictly funded through the fire apparatus sinking fund. And there's multiple revenue sources that are building up that fund over time that are both paying for the lease payments and interest on those and allowing us to buy them into the future. There's a schedule for replacement of fire apparatus as they come due. So there's a portion of the property tax and some excess of the fire levy tax. So hopefully that answers your question.
So is there a...
Want to be clear is we're not double counting. We're not doing a fleet replacement rate plus the fire apparatus sinking fund. It's one or the other, depending on the vehicle.
So if financing became restrictive in the future, how would you pay for the replacement of the apparatus if you had no sinking to do that?
That would be difficult.
It would be difficult. So there was never a balance in the sinking fund prior to the debt being incurred. You know, nobody ever had, let's say, $250,000 and said to themselves, well, rather than pay for this cash, let's finance it. That balance never existed in the sinking fund?
I think specifically to fire apparatus, those really large fire trucks, the pumper trucks, the ladder trucks that we used to have. Now we just have pumper trucks and midi trucks. They were always purchased via debt. And I think when we started lease financing them, it was at that point where we created the fire apparatus sinking fund, acknowledging that we didn't have a long-term plan prior to that for replacing some of these big pieces of apparatus.
Okay, and so what is it about the size of this that makes it, in the rest of the sinking of the other vehicles, why is this service on debt not a better option than trying to have a sinking that is prospectively replacing vehicles that are already in the fleet?
So is your question, why do we not lease finance all of our fleet?
Yeah, why do we sink in advance of replacement instead of just do it in the rears and finance the fleet?
I don't know that I have a great answer for that. I think the reason that we chose to do it for fire apparatus was, one, we didn't have an existing sinking fund for those, and they're typically purchases anywhere from $700,000 to over $1 million each. I wouldn't say that's true for most of our fleet, which are more in the $30,000 to $50,000 per purchase.
Okay.
So might you look at a contracting city with the need to contract a fleet and maybe revisit the policy about sinking? I mean, my fear with the sinking fund is that it gears everybody up to replace equipment at the end of a known kind of service life. You know, a police car is good for 48 months, a truck's good for 10 years, a fire apparatus is good for 20 years. Everybody kind of gets primed to replace it when the sinking fund has a balance to replace it. That's not to say that the vehicle doesn't need to be replaced, but if you take on debt, buy an asset, service the debt, you own the asset at the end of the debt, you can look at it and say to yourself, should I repurpose this? Should I sell it? Should I wait? Should I replace it? What should I do? That might be another strategy that we could use.
Sure, and I would argue that we were doing those things even with a sinking fund model, as we were asking those questions every time we set those rates. Does this vehicle need to be replaced on this schedule? Can the useful life be extended? Do we need to purchase a new or different vehicle for the purposes that it's used for? So whether it's lease financed or whether it's a sinking fund, we're still setting dollars aside each year to replace those vehicles as the need arises. And we're always asking ourselves that question as we're setting those rates on how we move forward.
So how many of the vehicles have we sold due to the contraction?
I could get you the answer to that. I don't have it with me today.
This might be a good time. I mean, it may be a policy discussion that needs to be had. I mean, as far as probably, I know we have other council members that want to ask questions. Councilmember Nice, you can certainly come back for a follow-up question. We have Councilmember Anderall.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I think I'm off mute, am I? Yes, miraculously. So I sent some questions a little bit earlier about the contributions appear to be going up. And I'm just wondering a couple of things. With the fewer employees, does that drive smaller fleet replacement costs, or fewer vehicles necessary? With work at home, does that drive less driving? And so I'm kind of wondering about the assumptions that go into increasing fleet rental fund. And then as a kind of related, unrelated question is, what thought has been given to putting these expenses in the departments that have the vehicles to kind of try to incentivize additional efficiencies or whatever? So maybe you could just talk to those questions generally.
So I'll start and I'll ask Jason Kittner to join me as well. First of all, the departments are billed for fleet use. So that's already incorporated into the equipment replacement fund model. I responded to your email earlier, Council Anderall, and I was taking a stab in the dark. The shared pool vehicles, the recreation center vans, their use is down considerably, right? We don't have recreation programs running. But keep in mind, most of our fleet is tied to public safety and maintenance functions, which are still being performed. And in the case of maintenance, we used to drive sometimes 4 people to a truck. We're now, due to the pandemic, only able to put 1 person in a truck or on a piece of equipment at a time. And so my observation, and I'll ask Jason Kittner to weigh in here, is that our fleet use is not down consistently. In fact, some places it might be ticking up a little bit. But on balance, there are some vehicles that are sitting idle right now. Jason, did you want to weigh in on fleet use during the pandemic?
No, I think you summarized it really, really well. You're absolutely correct in terms of using more vehicles to socially distance our crews. As far as the replacement cycle goes, we have looked at, as Luan mentioned, we have looked at extending the useful life of vehicles, and we can certainly bring back that information to the council at a later date in terms of the number of vehicles. But it's an ongoing conversation. We haven't just eradicate our fleet, using them, and there's still an unknown with the parks maintenance, seasonal and casual labor moving forward, because obviously in the summer months our fleet use increases due to the staffing model. So we haven't just sold off that fleet yet at this point in time until the decision's made on our future parks maintenance model as well.
Just Mayor Wong, real quick, I want to go back to Councilmember Neese's question. If the council desired to take a look at a leasing option instead of using our sinking fund model, that could be done. I'm not sure it could be done in time for this budget. That would be a policy work plan item we need to put on the list. And I'm kind of scanning our policy work we have in the queue. So that would be how we would get that done, or at least analyze a policy change. So it could be done, but probably something that would have to be looked at next year. And then Councilmember Andorl asked about increasing costs. We evaluate, especially our specialty equipment. We keep an eye on replacement rates, and so we are adjusting equipment fund contributions. You know, we're keeping an eye on what the market is doing, if you will. I worked in a city previously where once, to Councilmember Neese's point, once a vehicle hit 7 years, it was done, it didn't matter, out the door. Our policy and our practices are far more flexible, and Jason Kittner, who oversees fleet right now, along with Lawan, pretty heavily scrutinize if we're keeping it or getting rid of it. Likewise, if we have an asset that is underperforming, a lemon, if you will, we may try to accelerate the replacement because the costs are increasing too greatly. And we have had, I can think of at least one vehicle that needed to go early. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Councilmember Jacobson.
Matt, on your last slide, you had a firefighter's pension fund. Is that the same thing as the left one reserve?
No, council member, those are two separate. The left one reserve exists as a reserve within the general fund.
Okay.
And the firefighter's pension fund is a separate fund.
What's its purpose?
Yeah, Lawan, can you take that one?
Yes, so the pension fund exists for firefighters only, and it's firefighters who were hired prior to the existence of LEF 1. So these are pre-LEF 1 firefighters, and I believe we have about 6 retirees left that are being paid out of that pension fund.
Got it, thanks.
So council, I want to just mention something really quick here. In your budget notebook, which I know you all have dutifully by your sides, the section that's called recap by fund, the part of the presentation we just completed is all we plan to talk about in terms of the funds at this point. So if you've dog-eared a page, if you've got a sticky note or a question you want to ask about anything in those pages, now would be a good time because we're moving on to revenues. And I promise we keep this high level because you've read your notebooks, but I want to just call out, we're at the question phase of the recap by funds section of the budget.
Okay, thank you for that reminder. Councilmember Neese, I know you have you have another question. I want to ask my question first, I guess, at this point. This is for Matt. This is actually pertaining to the self-insurance claim reserve. I think that's the name. And I emailed you a question because I wondered why it was set up at $110,000 when the statutory minimum is 40,000, and it seems like it's overfunded.
Thank you, Councilmember Mayor. The self-insurance fund was established in 1982, and the minimum amount was set at $40,000. And so for the past 20 years, that fund has hovered between $90,000 and $120,000. And in 2006 is when its lowest point, which is about $91,000. And so that fund is meant to pay for any of our premiums or any catastrophic losses that are not covered by our insurance. And so the city has millions of dollars worth of capital assets, as well as insurance policies. And so it's at council's discretion to determine what amount of money that this fund should be set at, whether it's $40,000 or something different. Any money that you take out of this special revenue fund, I'm sorry, it's a general purpose fund, would just be one-time use.
Okay.
Benson, Mayor Wong, just to clarify,
Yeah.
the municipal code sets the minimum balance at $40,000, not the maximum.
Okay, so it's minimum of 40, and we have it we're funding it at about $110,000.
Yep.
And historically, what are our expenses from that fund?
It is very rarely used. We only saw it really dip down in 2006.
Lawan, do you have any additional information on how that fund's been used historically?
Yeah, we typically budgeted about 10,000 per year, both revenues and expenditures, assuming that if we were to use any part of that reserve, we would replenish it, which is where the 10,000 of revenues comes from. In my experience with this city, we've very rarely used it, and 10,000 represents about 2 times that we would use 5,000 to get us to our deductible limit. So again, it's really a council policy on whether some of that money can come out of that fund or we leave it alone.
Okay. And again, it would go into the general fund. I mean, if that's our council's prerogative.
It's a general purpose revenue that funded it, so it would be allocated to a general purpose fund or the general fund.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Neese.
Just circling back on the previous discussion. So we had heard that the rationale that during COVID that there was separation and people needed to use multiple vehicles. We also heard that there was another municipality that wanted to lease vehicles from us, which would allow us to keep the asset, but try and get some revenue off of it. Has anybody not looked at paying the employees mileage to drive themselves to the work site, since they would previously take one single vehicle? They could meet that vehicle, and then we could look at surplusing some of this equipment. The reason I'm asking is that we know that surplus vehicles right now that are in good condition are worth more than they used to be. There's a very strong demand in the secondary market for used, especially heavy equipment, trucks, things like that right now. Have we looked at strategies that allow us to shrink the fleet, convert the assets, and still get people safely to the job sites?
We did have, I think this is why Ally's appeared here. I've had a couple conversations about this, Councilmember Neese. I recall some point previously you raised this. We have operating concerns from WCIA and likely some union concerns as well. Liability concerns from our insurance company. Ally, is that where you were headed?
Yeah, if a city employee is driving their personal vehicle during the workday, their insurance, they are not covered by WCIA's insurance. It would be their own personal insurance. So we discourage employees from using their own vehicles during the day, mostly for our utility team and park maintenance teams.
Okay, so I'll stop beating my drum, but only to say that maybe we could look at them using some of the cheaper idle assets so that we could look at some of the more expensive assets that could be sold on the secondary that won't be used.
Thank you. Councilmember Rosenbaum.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask about the unemployment reserve fund. I know when we talked about that, our hope was that we wouldn't use all of it, and having to take this one for the record, but does anyone know where we stand with that fund right now?
So you're talking about the unemployment reserve that we created in 2020?
Yeah.
The 300,000?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think Councilmember Andrew had raised that question. So I'll look to both Lawan and Ally to help me answer that one. And just, let's remember everyone, if Lawan, if you could remind the council what action we took in 2020, because this wasn't a reserve we had previously.
Sure. So the council appropriated $300,000 from the contingency fund in order to set up a reserve or a fund in order to pay for unemployment costs, which are highly unpredictable and ultimately unknown until they happen. To date, for 2020, we have paid in unemployment claims roughly about 90,000. So we've used less than 100,000 of that reserve to date.
If any way to, anticipate how much more of this 300,000 we're going to end up using?
Yeah, we could do a calculation of the employees that we know are current or former employees that are currently receiving, and current employees that are receiving unemployment. The usual time limit is 26 weeks for unemployment in 1 year, but it was extended to 39 weeks. So we do have a little bit further to go before those benefits would end. And there's two factors. There's the 39 weeks and then there's the maximum amount. So each person has a maximum amount that they can receive. So even if they don't make it to 39 weeks, we'll still have to pay those costs.
So we're likely, I believe our last layoff, Ally, was sometime in May? June, thank you. So we'll likely be into Q1 of 2021.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Reynolds.
I have a few questions. If I become annoying and you want me to take it offline, let me know. First question on the street fund. I'm looking at the salaries and wages that are shown there in the street fund. I haven't gone back to look at the head counts for for that department, but it strikes me as a much lower number than I expected. Is that not covering all the salaries of the people in there?
Lawan?
Within the street fund, it is primarily project management for street-related projects.
Okay.
So maintenance, this is an important clarification. Maintenance of, Jason, go ahead. You're nodding. Go ahead and say what I'm going to say.
Yeah, so maintenance for the street fund is limited to the arterials that's funded by the street fund. So it doesn't include all of the right-of-way maintenance employees as a whole. It's parsed out based off of the work that's specifically tied to the street fund and those roads covered in the street fund.
Okay, so there is other money being spent on the streets somewhere else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Within the general fund, yes.
Okay. Next question, the transportation impact fees on that same tab. I'm probably confusing this with something else, but I thought we lost those with the recent car tab initiative. Is that something else?
Separate items. Lawan, do you want to take that one?
If I can get this. Transportation impact fees are collected from development, so it is related to development.
Okay, I'm thinking of
You're speaking of the transportation benefit district. That's the revenues that we've lost.
Yes.
Okay, that makes total sense. Okay, next question is on the YFS budget on B12 in the budget book. There are a few items listed as revenues there that I think of as expenses, like school counselor program support, for example. So is that it's revenue to this fund that is coming from the general fund? Is that what's happening here?
This is that specific $60,000 contribution comes from the school district. They contribute annually via two payments, the beginning and end of the year, $60,000.
And is it a similar story for the emergency assistance support? Where's that coming from as revenue?
That's typically donation revenue that is donor designated for emergency assistance.
Okay. And then in the contractual services on YFS, there's a huge drop from 2020 to, well, actually 2020 is hugely up compared to the others. What's the scoop there?
I believe that has to do with how we budgeted in 2020 for the $350,000 roughly in federal grants. I think the entire budget was dropped into contract services, and we have since refined how we're budgeting for those two programs.
Okay. And then a couple of things on the debt service and bond redemption. These funds seem to be.
This is your last question, Councilmember Reynolds.
Okay.
Councilmember Jacobson waiting.
Okay, I'll try to make this the last one. Philosophically, those funds don't seem to have much happening. Do they really need to exist?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just a technicality of governmental accounting that we do have to have those debt service funds because we don't carry long-term liabilities in the general fund.
Okay, I'll save my other queries for bothering Matt on his weekends or something. Thank you.
Councilmember Jacobson.
I think someone here, I think maybe you, Luan, said that our deductible is $5,000 with WICA. If we looked at increasing the deductible and what the ROI on that would be in terms of lower policy costs, or are we locked into set deductible with WICA?
You know, that is a great question. Luan or Ally, do you happen to know the answer to that question?
I don't know the answer specifically. I do know that since we are in an insurance pool, I believe that we do have some control over what we choose as our deductibles. So that's definitely something I can look into and get back to you on.
Thank you.
Councilmember Reynolds, your hand is still up. If you have another question? Okay, it's down. That is it for this round of questions right now. So if you want to proceed, I guess, with the next series of slides.
All right, Council, we are moving on in the budget notebook to the revenue section. We have just a few slides, same theme as the fund section. We stayed pretty high level. We are not going page by page. And Matt will be picking up here. All right.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jesse. Though we discussed the revenue forecast on September 1st, it's worth providing a brief overview of some of the primary general fund revenues. And so this gives you a broad picture, different chart, different flavor, but similar number, 148.6 million of revenues over the biennium. 69.8 million in 21, 78.8 million in 2022. And this chart really outlines where those dollars are coming from. Next slide. Property tax is the city's largest general fund revenue source and accounts for 43% of general fund revenues in 2021. So the city can increase the property tax levy 1% each year, or by the implicit price deflator rate, whichever is less, plus new construction. So for 2021, the Bureau of Economic Analysis set the implicit price deflator at 0.6%. And so for background, IPD is used to measure inflation based on personal consumption, and it impacts how much property tax revenue a jurisdiction can collect each year based on state law. So when the IPD is less than 1%, per state law, a supermajority of the council must make a finding of substantial need via a resolution to increase the property tax the full 1%. So next slide. So for the preliminary budget, we assumed the 1% levy increase in fiscal year 2021. Per your direction tonight, we will return to council with a resolution of substantial need at the November 17th meeting, similar to the action that was taken both in fiscal year 2016 and 2017 when the implicit price deflator was below 1%. For council's consideration here, the difference between not taking the full 1% levy increase versus the IPD rate is $55,000 in 2021. However, this has a compounding effect on future years because if we don't take the 1%, it means the city will have less dollars upon which to base future 1% property tax levy increases. That was a lot, so I'll pause here for questions.
Councilmember Neese.
while you're on the topic, I wonder if you couldn't just also tell the council about banking an increase, but still voting to take it, because that is another option.
That is another option. And I have to admit, my full understanding of banking capacity is it's still pretty, I'm still pretty new to bank capacity. So if Luan could help me with that, that is a third option on the table for the council.
That's a great point. Lawan, do you want to take this or?
I don't know that I have a whole lot more to add than Matt does. I think we're both pretty new to the notion of property tax and banking capacity. It's something we could ask some questions about and get back to the council on.
And
I think in a nutshell, what it would do is it would allow you to not be in future years, since you're voting on taking it, but you're banking it, means you're not collecting it. If in a future year you want to take it, you can basically recall it.
Yeah.
So you don't lose the compounding benefit of the 1% increases year over year, but you do basically concede in the year that you bank it that you're not going to collect it.
that's exactly right, Councilmember Neese. The next time you ask a question, we'll just have you answer it. That's exactly right. We did have
So it is a strategy that it is a strategy.
It is.
Councilmember Andrew.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Curious about this finding of substantial need, and maybe BO has to answer this. But given that we have a projection of a balanced budget and we have contingency funds in excess of even the 12.5% and far in excess of what the 10% would be, what kind of findings of fact do we need to make to really legitimately find substantial need?
Councilmember Andrew, we may not be fully prepared to answer that this evening. I would be happy to get back to you with the legal requirements of a resolution or ordinance. I will say, although we have a balanced budget, important reminder that you have two operations that are, nearly fully stood down right now, and we don't have the same level of. We won't be able to fully recover them based on our current surplus and one-time fund balances. So that alone would likely meet the requirements, but why don't you let us get back to you? We've done this resolution at least twice in recent history. I'd be happy to share that with you.
I get it, thanks, and I'm sorry I didn't preview that question, but it just kind of popped to mind.
It's actually a great question, so we'd be happy to get back to you.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Rosenbaum.
Thanks. Matt, just to clarify, those two different options, 1% versus 0.6, how would that impact, or would that impact the various other taxing jurisdictions that our property taxes go into?
So are you referring to the other taxing jurisdictions on the island and whether or not they would be impacted by?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's to my understanding that they would not be impacted by our decision, the council's decision.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Weicker.
And Matt, I would just add that one number that might be useful in this deliberation is how much that equates to per household. 139 divided by 7,500 homes. Isn't that much per year?
Well, we use the total assessed valuation to take that into account. And so I'm working with 2020 numbers because we haven't received 2021 figures from the King County Assessor's Office. But it basically pencils out a 1% increase in 2020, pencils out to about $12 additional for a home with average value of $1.35 million.
$12 for the year, so $1 a month.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. No other questions at this point.
Great.
Matt.
We'll keep going.
Okay. So general sales tax on the island is 10%. And of this, the city receives 0.85% plus an additional 0.1% to fund criminal justice programming. Taken together, sales tax revenues are projected to remain flat in 2021 due to the economic uncertainties related to the pandemic, with a rebound of 5% projected in 2022. Next slide.
And this is where council, I'll just comment, we've gone pretty conservative on our sales tax projections. So I would say safely conservative, and your question might be, well, what if sales tax performs better? It's performed better in 2020 than you originally projected. And I would say, yes, if that is the case, a reminder that you have opportunities to recognize the additional revenue you receive ahead of our projections at any point in the biennium and apply them through a budget amendment. So my recommendation is still to stay conservative in our projections. Certainly welcome your feedback. I think we have one more slide before we take a break here.
Okay, business and occupation tax is the 0.001 tax that is collected from active Mercer Island business license holders with gross receipts of more than $150,000 a year. And this is a revenue that goes straight into the general fund. It supports general government services. And the business community has been significantly impacted by the pandemic. And so the September 1st forecast assumed a 15% decline in B&O taxes in 2020, 10% decline in 2021, and a 5% decline in 2022. We're hopeful that's not the case, but that's what the projections are for September, based on the September 1st forecast. Next slide.
Oops.
So I'm happy to pause here. If there's any additional questions regarding
And
the general fund revenues.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, let me just jump in here. So, council, that was brief. That was the whole revenue section. We did not go over every revenue in that section of your notebook. So again, I'll encourage you, go look for your sticky notes or your dog-eared pages. And if you have questions, we'd be happy to take those now, because next up is the department budgets. One caveat on that, a number of your revenues will be discussed in detail next week as part of our capital improvement plan discussion. So things like your REIT, anything tied to the street fund, utilities. Anyway, I'm happy to take revenue questions now.
Okay, Councilmember Rosenbaum.
Thanks. Hey, Matt, on page C2, there's a chart over city property tax levy rate that's been falling pretty consistently the last few years. Could you give a 30-second explanation as to why?
This chart is really bothersome. I'm going to ask Lawan to speak to it.
Sure. I think you have to remember that the city is allowed to levy 1% additional in dollars. And depending on that dollar amount, the math that creates the levy rate is they take that total dollar levy and divide it by the assessed valuation to determine the levy rate that is applied. So if we can only increase the dollar amount levied at 1%, but assessed valuation for the island as a whole is going up faster, what the math is, it pulls that rate down. So even though we're taking our 1% increase per year on the dollars levied, assessed valuation is going up faster and it's bringing down the rate.
Thank you.
Sure.
Deputy Mayor Weicker. Is that an old hand or?
Old hand, sorry.
Hey, I apologize. I have a question back to the funds. And so I apologize. But Matt, you just went off before I could get my notes on it. I just have a general question regarding the left one unfunded liability. And so do you happen to know what that unfunded liability is and how do we show that liability on our books? And it's a part of the budget process at all in terms of any particular fund?
Lawan?
Yeah, the total unfunded liability is an actuarial measurement. We do have an updated report. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it's a little over 10 million. We are not required, obviously, to fund that whole liability up front. What we are required to do is pay the liabilities as they come due. So what we budget for in your budget document is an estimate for left one medical premiums and any out-of-pocket left one medical care. So think prescriptions, doctor's bills, anything that the premiums don't cover, and also any long-term care coverage for left one retirees. We have 2 known left one retirees right now in long-term care. We have budgeted in the preliminary document for that on an ongoing basis. And then we have the reserve, so if something come up through the next biennium, that would put us above what's already budgeted.
And the one we budget for annually in the non-department budget.
Non-departmental reflects, there's the big benefit line in the non-departmental section, and that's reflective of what we're budgeting for left one retiree coverage.
And so we're headed to that conversation next.
Okay, and that, again, for the biennium, and then there is a reserve on top of that?
Correct.
Okay, all right. So that question is really for Councilmember Reynolds' benefit, it being of an actuarial nature. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. So do folks want to take a 5 to 10 minute break at this point, or City Manager, how are we doing?
You know, I would suggest we move into the department budgets because the first several are relatively, well, I'm not going to say that. They're a little more straightforward than some of the others, and then maybe take a break closer to 8 o'clock if that's okay with folks. Keep pushing.
Okay, let's do it that way. Okay.
All right. Actually, I'm sorry, Matt, I wildly jumped the gun. I forgot you had these general fund slides. So let's turn back to you and then we'll jump into the department budget. Sorry about that.
Okay, well, if council will indulge me, we're just going to walk through general fund expenditures, starting with this table. It breaks out the general fund. It breaks out the general fund from the city's other 6 fund categories, so the council can see the total general fund expenditures and associated FTEs in each year of the preliminary budget. So in 2021, the expenditure budget is 29.2 million with 127.3 FTEs. And in 2022, it's 29.6 million with 125.3 FTEs. Next slide, please. So compared to 2020, in 2021, general fund expenditures decreased by 3.6 million. And we see a reduction of 20 FTEs. And this is largely a result of the cost saving measures taken by council and the administration as a result of the pandemic this year. Next slide. So this is a 4-year pro forma that distills the major revenues within the general fund. Jesse, would you mind giving me a click?
Yep.
Okay. And so focus on the figures in the bottom right of the table after you've gotten a chance to look at these revenues. 29.9 million in general fund revenues in 21 and 30.7 in 2022. Next slide. This is the same pro forma, but it depicts general fund expenditures. Again, click please. Focus on the figures in the bottom right. Next slide. So this table is distilling the beginning and ending general fund balance for each fiscal year. Estimated revenues and expenditures are taken into account at the top of the table. Go for a click, please. All right. A number of reserves are set aside within the general fund balance, which make up the restricted or assigned fund balance. Another click. So I want to draw your attention to this bottom row, which lists the amount of general fund balance that is unassigned. Happy to pause here for questions.
Councilmember Reynolds.
My questions were actually from before. I apologize. I'm going to back this up just a couple from the prior section. Can you clarify on the property tax budgets forecast, what's assumed for new construction impacts?
Sure, that's
We've assumed,
go ahead.
for budget purposes, we assumed $100,000.
100,000 of revenue from new construction.
From new construction.
Not $100,000 of new construction. Okay.
Forgive me.
And second question, Just want to clarify that the 2020 numbers that are here when you showed head count dropping, that was relative to the original 2020 budgeted balance, not the number of people that are on payroll now. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay. And similarly, when we see 2021 budget expenditures dropping from 2020, I'm assuming that's not because the run rate is dropping, but rather that the beginning of 2020, we had a higher run rate then, and that the run rate for 2021 is kind of similar to what it was at the end of 2020. Is that correct?
Would benefit from you explaining what you mean by run rate.
Well, if we're spending X $1,000 a month at the end of 2020 for operations for December 2020, is January 2021 going to be about the same, or are you anticipating further cuts in staff or cuts in expenses?
Thank you for explaining that. No, it's going to be, we're anticipating it to be the same.
Okay, thank you.
The only caveat is that we're anticipating a third pay period hitting this December, which is a 10-year anomaly.
Okay,
and we're done with that now, right? Because we're switching to 2 payrolls a month. Is that correct?
That's correct. January 1.
Okay.
Yep.
Great,
That's it for now. Thank you.
So Mayor Wong, you asked 2 questions previously that are answered on this slide. First of all, here's where your left one long-term care reserve fund is.
Yes.
And you'd also asked a question about the unrestricted general fund balance and where that showed up. So it's here. I think we've got a couple more slides on this.
Okay, and again, that was a $3.5 million figure that was in the previous slide. So where does that correspond on these slides?
Matt, should we keep going?
Yeah, let's
Well, before you go on, Councilmember Andrew has a question.
Councilmember, you're on mute.
For the love of Pete. Okay, thanks. A prior slide said something, I think, about a reduction in headcount of 20 is attributable to efficiencies. And so can I take from that, since we're down 30, that 10 of those are attributable to the pandemic? Or how do I read that? I had kind of asked in an email earlier today, how do we know where the headcount, why we have the headcount reductions? Is it efficiencies? Is it fewer city services being offered? How can you assign one to the other?
It's far more complicated than that, which is why I did that presentation on September 22nd. We had reductions. We've proposed positions to be restored. We've proposed positions that were different than prior years. The customer service team is an example. Those positions didn't exist previously. So my thought in reading your email today, Councilmember Anderl, was I may have to answer the questions position by position as we go through to the department budgets. There's no broad way to group all of these changes together. There was just too much movement in 2020.
Okay, great. And then the second question that I had, since we have this slide up now with the unassigned fund balance highlighted in a red box, can we get a little bit more detail about what that is, what it can be used for, what we should be using it for?
Let's start with where it came from. Lawan? Sorry.
Sure. And I think if Matt goes a couple more slides, we'll get a little more detail, but most of that is coming from prior year surpluses that have not been appropriated by the council. I think we ended 2019 with just over $3 million in unappropriated or unassigned fund balance that was at the council's discretion.
And so is that in addition to the contingency fund?
That
Correct.
is. Yeah. Now, again, we talked about this earlier in the year, and one of the questions was, Jesse, why don't we use these one-time funds now to save positions, whatever it might be. And my recommendation at the time was hold because of where we are now, needing one-time funds to resume services that have been stood down at this point for 7-8 months and may not come back until sometime in 21 or 22. So we have a few more slides just to get you thinking about where this one-time money may need to go. Certainly it can also be used to fund budget proposals, My recommendation, my strong recommendation is because this is one-time money, not ongoing, that you apply it to one-time needs, not ongoing needs. Maybe, Mr. Mayor, it might make sense to go through a few more slides so we can take this a little bit further.
Yeah, that is fine. Thank you.
Okay. Matt?
Okay, thank you, Jesse. So we're gonna tease out the general fund balance a little bit more. This table is the same as the previous, but it's a little bit more condensed, with the figures in the bottom row matching the numbers that were highlighted on the previous slide. Revenues and expenditures are taken into account at the top of this table. So fund balance less the restricted portions yield the unassigned or unrestricted ending balance in each fiscal year. And the reason why I'm showing you this, there's two reasons why I'm showing you this. The first is that we caught an error in the budget document. Next slide. So the amount that was committed was off by $300,000, which is the appropriation from the compensated absences reserve to cover cash outs in 2020, which mistakenly reduced the unrestricted fund balance as opposed to the compensation, the comp absence reserve. Which is part of the committed restricted 2019 total. So we're gonna make that correction. This is the correct portrayal of this chart when we bring back the preliminary budget for final adoption in December. And it's just a classification error. But I just wanted to point it out to you that in 2019, the unrestricted fund balance for the general fund was around 3 million. Next slide. Second, and more importantly, are these highlighted numbers. So the surplus is where revenues exceed expenditures in each fiscal years of the budget, as well as the resulting unassigned or unrestricted fund balance. So these figures are also portrayed in the 6-year general fund forecast. Next slide. And you can see them highlighted here. So the y-axis of this chart conveys the dollar amount in millions. The x-axis shows each respective fiscal year. Along the bottom of the x-axis are bars illustrating the ending fund balance within a given year. The dashed red line shows the general fund expenditures against general fund revenues, which is depicted by the black line. And the blue area between the lines illustrates the revenues over or under expenses. And so based on current projections, staff anticipates that we will end this fiscal year 2020, with just enough revenues to meet expenditures. And because expenditures in fiscal years 21 and 22 are lower than projected general fund revenues, you see a surplus here. Note that the balance, those black bars in each year, is that is a cumulative balance. It's based upon the one-time surplus from prior years. So we'll go on to the next slide. And what I'm trying to do here is just to use this table to clarify this point, that in 2021, we anticipate the rolling fund balance will be $4.4 million, $800,000 of which is surplus, in addition to 3.6 million from prior years. And because revenues exceed expenses by 1.07 million in 2022, this potential surplus would be added to the general fund rolling balance. And so before we go through budget proposals, that is the variety of needs, both one-time and ongoing, that staff has outlined for council, it's worth considering how to think about these dollars. When revenues exceed expenditures in a given fiscal year, these dollars are well spent on ongoing uses because they are arguably ongoing. Carryover fund balance from prior years is best used on one-time expenses because these dollars are arguably one-time. They happened in the past and they're not necessarily reoccurring, and therefore best to use them on one-time expenditures. So I'm happy to pause here for questions before we go into the department overview regarding the general fund balance.
Councilmember Neese.
But the only caveat I might try to add to that is that one-time expenditures can be more than a park bench or more than a new pickup truck. if you look at what is happening in our police department, where we have a high number of retirements coming due relatively in the same period of time, and a transit train intercept coming online in the next few years, those one-time funds could be used to pre-fund new additional officers that could then be drawn back down. So I don't think it should be limited to, I think that the council should have an open mind about what one-time funding could look like when you have a ramp up and a drawback down potentially in PD.
That's a great point, Councilmember Neese, and we happen to be in one of those cycles right now where we're ramping or planning to ramp things up, and we may need one-time dollars to do so.
I have a question for Matt. I guess when revenues exceed expenditure estimates, you refer or we suggest that that might be something that might be suitable for ongoing uses. Is that necessarily so? I mean, it could be just a one-time deal where you have the revenues exceed. So I'm not sure if I necessarily buy that particular revenue.
I think what we're really trying to call your attention to is that if you're intending to fund a position and you have a number of them on your budget proposal list, and you intend on that position to be a permanent FTE, not an LTE, our advice would be to look at your surplus, your ongoing revenues to fund your staff positions. Otherwise, we put ourselves, except to the point that Councilmember Neese mentioned, is there's some ramp up situations happening in 2021, 22 that are really unique to the situation we're in at the moment.
Okay.
So I got so excited to get to the department budget that I forgot we had that section, and we have one more, but I'm happy to take you through the budget proposals, and then it might be time for a break. And go ahead.
I'm glad we had this discussion because I think it's a little bit eye-opening when you think in terms of how much you have in terms of unrestricted balance. So
yeah.
Appreciate that. So there is, well, we only have 3 slides, or I guess there's a few slides for the budget proposals.
Yep, and I'll be pretty quick here. If I can get the screen to move. Sorry. There we go. Can everyone read that? Just kidding. You don't need to read it. This slide is just here to remind you that as part of your budget, we've identified a number of budget proposals for your consideration. Some one-time, special projects that will really only occur at this moment, like the class and comp study, and then ongoing investments, as I was just referencing, that are largely staff positions. This is the staff recommendation or the city's recommendation to you for consideration. Council, it's perfectly normal and acceptable that you all may have additional budget proposals that you'd like us to consider. Over the next 2 meetings, it would be helpful to identify those, looking for consensus from the council, so that we can include them in our comprehensive discussion on November 2nd. A couple things here, and, was this? Yes, sorry. There's a part 1. This is general fund budget proposals, and moving forward, these are budget proposals in other funds. Again, we'll be walking through these a little bit later tonight and next week, so I won't go over all of them here. A couple reminders, and this is a bit of a cautionary tale. First of all, the last council meeting, you did direct me to prepare a budget proposal to further assess outsourcing the fire department. So basically, the budget proposal would assume we're commencing an RFP process in 21. I am working on that budget proposal now. That will be included as part of your November 2nd packet materials. So as you're starting to think about disposition of your general fund surplus, again, those ongoing revenues and the one-time revenues we just identified, I want to remind you about a couple things. Recreation and arts programming freeze. In March, we literally suspended all of our recreation programs, and they have not resumed yet. In 2019, your subsidy, and that was the last time we had a full year, your subsidy for your recreation and arts programming was $600,000. So as we start to think about 21, 22, we've got kind of two buckets to consider here. How much do we need to set aside for one-time resources, working capital, if you will, to get the recreation division started up again? And what should we plan for in terms of an ongoing subsidy? Councilmember Anderl asked a question in an email today about, and I don't think you asked it directly, but I answered it in this way. I don't see the financial mechanism to bring back the recreation programming and community center at the level of operation that it was previously. Speaking of the community center, the way we budget for the community center and recreation programming has been separate. So in 2019, again, a very productive year for us, your community center subsidy, annual subsidy was $770,000 that year. So you put the two together and your annual subsidy was almost $1.4 million. So you can see where the math problem really starts to become a concern. We'll be talking about this probably a little bit more next week. I don't think we'll get to it tonight. I don't anticipate that we will recover at the same service levels, your community center and recreation operations. Now, there's certainly, this is why we need to do more planning work, because some of this is tied to our policies, right? Some of the subsidy is because we have said we will subsidize these services, whether it's senior programs or youth programs, or we actually subsidize use of the community center. So council, this is a pretty concerning budget issue for us. We weren't fully prepared to present you with a recommendation at this moment in time, but we'll be asking for you to plan, set aside, if you will, funds in anticipation of recovering these services at some point in the biennium. And I'm getting ahead of myself, but I anticipate starting this work pretty soon. We've got some CARES Act money that we can use to get some consulting support to start planning the recovery. We're not the only city, by the way, that's dealing with this. A number of cities are in the same exact spot. We'll be back probably in Q1, I would assume, talking to you about what the recovery plan looks like. So this slide is just to say, hey, remember, your budget does not include, except for very minimal, your recreation and arts programs or your community center operations. Actually, let me take that back. Some of your community center base fees are included. Also, the thrift shop. We're slowly trying to bring the thrift shop back online. We're going to reach a critical crossover point here where we will no longer be able to rely on volunteers exclusively, and we will need to start bringing back staff. So again, we'll be talking when we get to November 2nd about how much one-time money do we need to set aside to start up the thrift shop again, and how might that play out over 21, 22. And here's another preview. I have gone really conservative with the YFS fund in terms of revenue projections for the thrift shop. You will see when we get there, and again, it'll be next week, that I am projecting thrift shop revenues to be flat in 21, 22, a little over $300,000 a year. You might be thinking, Jesse, that's absolutely ridiculous. You've lost your mind. It is low. It's very conservative. I've done that so that we could have a discussion here today. What council, or not today, excuse me, probably next week. What council are you comfortable with in terms of projecting thrift shop revenues? Do we go ahead and go with what's presented, which is you keep it low? And I'll tell you what that means. What that means is we have a almost $200,000 subsidy needed in 2021 for the YFS fund. Because of the way I've projected thrift shop revenues, and over $800,000 in one-time money that's needed in 2022 to balance. So why am I telling you all this? The budget is balanced based on one-time money. We still need you to tell us where that's coming from, and what the right subsidy level should be. Should I be less conservative? Should we bump up the revenue projections? So again, this is a preview. Much of this is going to be talked about next week. But I just wanted to let you know that there's some operating considerations here, pretty significant operating recovery discussions that we still need to have. Okay, I've already said this, so I'll just remind you, council, if the majority of the council would like to add something else to the budget proposal list, I would love to hear about that, probably next week so that we can include it on the November 2nd city council meeting. And this is where we'll be talking about budget proposals, contingency fund and our one-time resources in the general fund. All right, now we're actually ready to go into department budget discussions. Mr. Mayor and Council, would you like to take a break now, or would you like me to keep going?
And I think we're going to take a break. Councilmember Jacobson, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. That's based on the last slide. And that is that without at least some form of subsidy for recreation programs and the community center, neither of those activities will get to the point where they could generate any revenue. Is that a correct assumption?
You know, let me answer that in two parts. We will have startup resources that are needed. I'll use the recreation programs as an example. Typically, right now, this time of year, we would be planning for summer camps, right? So we're going to need some one-time money to bring staff on to bring programs back. My goal, Council, your summer camp programs are high revenue generators. They at least cost recover, if not over and above just a little bit. I would like to have summer camps, provided pandemic circumstances allow, back online in June. So that means, Councilmember Jacobson, we are going to need a one-time infusion sometime in Q1, and we're gonna have to be very creative about staffing. Even if we contract out the programming, which is possible, we still have to have staff to manage those contracts. The community center, if you separate the programming, right, that requires a fair amount of planning. Not all of our programs cost recover, as well as summer camps. The community center, we derive revenue from drop-in programs and facility rentals. And some of those are going to be allowed to come back online. But one of our greatest revenue drivers is the Mercer room at the community center. It was booked almost every weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for the duration of the year for private events. Those events are still severely restricted. So the question is, in fact, several of you have asked me, if I'm a bride to my husband, I'm not planning to be a bride anytime soon, am I going to pay full freight for that room? And I think the answer, we don't know. I believe the capacity has now gone up to like 50 people for a wedding. So I'm telling you all this because we have to be very cautious. It's got to be a gradual on-ramp. All of those services require staffing. Basically, we're staffed right now to manage your athletic fields, and that's it. That was probably more than you wanted to know, Councilmember Jacobson. But we've been thinking a lot about how we bring these services back and financial risks and all of that.
I have something to tell the Parks and Rec Commission, so I think I know something when we have a Parks and Rec meeting, a commission meeting ever.
That's
Okay.
Thank you.
Why don't we go ahead and take a 10-minute break and come back at 8:05? Okay?
Perfect.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, we are live again.
Great. Well, the show is yours as far as the departments.
All right. Okay, we are finally to the department section of the budget. And I will have, I'll be continuing to lead this part of the presentation, inviting the leadership team members that are with us today to join me. I am going to share my screen. Hang with me, it takes a minute before it will move. All right. Council, just to make it interesting, we are not going in order. We tried to go with the departments that as I mentioned earlier, that were a little more straightforward and save some of the more complicated departments for the end. So to begin with, and I'll just remind you at the bottom of the slide, you see the number D13 there. We are on page D13 in your notebook. We're starting out with the City Council department. You may not have known that you are a department. So what you'll see here, this slide looks a little different than the departments, the other departments, since this is a City Council department. In the upper right-hand corner, you will see the projected budget 21-22 as compared to 19 and 20. On all the other slides, I've included key themes. For the City Council, I'll just remind you, in 2020, you established goals that were interrupted somewhat by the pandemic, but I've included them here just as a reference to what you said at the beginning of this year. Preparing for the impacts of growth and change, again, consideration on environmental sustainability. The next one was about articulating, communicating, and confirming a vision for effective and efficient city services, an economic development program. And I believe it was at your July meeting, you added, at my recommendation, a fourth goal, which was to address the emergency response work we were doing related to the pandemic. There are no budget proposals tied to the City Council department. And unless Ally has anything else to add here, are there any questions about?
I have one question.
Sure.
And just an explanation of what the contractual services are, and I can't remember, and then obviously there's 0 for 2022.
Sure. And I will look to Lawan for the budget detail. So Mayor Wong is asking about on page D14, the contractual services that were budgeted. That is a placeholder, I believe, Mayor Wong, for contractual work. Am I correct, Lawan?
And I believe in the past it's been used to assist with the planning sessions.
Yeah, it's been the consultants that we've hired to help us facilitate the planning sessions in January. And so we decided to leave some money in there, which also could be used for various trainings for the council. But then we did take it out for 2022.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions about the City Council budget? Okay. Non-departmental. I know as I was becoming more familiar with municipal budgeting, I thought this was the strangest name, the non-department department. A reminder of what this is for. This is, functions that aren't easily assigned to a specific department. I was mentioning earlier, the LEF 1 reserve the LEF 1 liabilities for 2021 are included here. This department supports mandatory and voluntary as well intergovernmental services. So this is where your fees for like Association of Washington Cities are paid from. You do have a number of budget proposals associated with the non-department. That includes the ADA transition plan, which forevermore, we funded it in the previous biennium, had actually planned to commence work in 2020, and then due to the pandemic, this was one of the work items that we suspended. You amended your budget in 2020 And we took this funding out, so we are putting it back here. Jason is on the line and he can talk about the soil remediation and site characterization budget proposal. Did you want to take that, Jason? This is on by the way, your non-department starts on D41 and your budget proposals are on page D44.
So this is the soil remediation site characterization consists of two locations. One you're very familiar with, that's the current city maintenance shop and former Honeywell site, where we had underground fuel tanks that leaked, and we've been in a multi-year remediation effort. Again, we're striving for a no further action letter from the Department of Ecology. And then the second site is at Fire Station 91. Council will recall that it was brought to our attention that it was reported to Ecology years ago around the construction of the fire station, remodel of the fire station, that the previous underground storage tanks leaked as well. It appears that some remediation was done as part of that project, but it was never closed out with Department of Ecology. So we have to do some additional site characterization at that location to indeed confirm that there is not contaminants at that site, or if there is identified contaminants at the site, we will have to go through a remediation effort at that site as well. So these two budget proposals include that body of work for those two sites.
So council, this is largely a must-do item, and you might be wondering, and then Jesse, why is it a budget proposal? We've called it out here. It's different than what was in, it's a one-time, well, that's not fair. It can be ongoing. This is a one-time request for 2021 for the scope of work that Jason just described. This is newer, so that's why it's there. And then the other budget proposal I wanted to call out, which I explained earlier, is the one-time appropriation for youth and family services. And again, you might be saying, Jesse, this probably isn't a budget proposal if you actually need it to balance your budget, and that's a fair point. I've included it here because we need to have a conversation, which I'd like to start next week, about what we should do with revenue assumptions on the thrift shop. If in fact, council, you are comfortable assuming a higher revenues in either 21 or 22 for the thrift shop, this one-time appropriation would in fact come down. So why don't I stop there and ask for questions?
I'm sorry, Jesse. Councilmember Reynolds has a question.
Yeah, I'm looking at the budget, and I apologize if you just said this while I was looking to the side here, but looking at the budget drop from 2020 to 2021, there's some huge drops, like salaries are dropping from 1.3 to 0.1. Supplies from 600,000 to 30,000. Is this just something that's been shifted to another department, or what's gone away?
Yeah, I'll ask Lawan or Ally to help me with those specifics.
I'm glad to see the cuts, but I'd like to understand it.
Councilmember Reynolds, can you tell me where you're looking at?
He's on page D43, looking at the expenditure section
Okay.
of the non-department budget.
Okay.
Correct, and the expenditures are dropping from total from 5.0 to 2.8, pretty dramatic.
Okay.
Sure, I can take a quick stab at that. I will remind the council that in 2020, the non-departmental includes all the emergency operations center costs that have been appropriated to keep the EOC open. That is being funded both by contingency and the CARES Act dollars. The other thing that happens in non-departmental is a lot of the contract services are to be one time. So things like the ADA transition plan, any of those contract services that we do know are going to be one time are also here. So those would drop off in the new budget.
So, Lawan, your audio cut off just a little bit there, but Councilmember Reynolds, salaries and wages, I think you heard that was all tied to the one-time appropriation for emergency response. And this is where it landed. So we amended the budget in 2020, which is why that salary and wages line is so high in 2020. You'll notice in 19, it's actually quite a bit lower. It's not often that we put staff into the non-department budget. Sometimes we do.
So which gives my follow-up question, which is comparing to 2019, we're a lot higher. So salaries go from 18 up to 145.
Yep.
What's the source of that?
So the 145,000 in 21 and 22 is a placeholder anticipating that we have some bargain agreements that we will be negotiating. So it's basically a reserve that allows us to address any market adjustments coming out of those.
Thank you.
Excuse me. I have a question regarding the ADA transition plan. I know that we've had it obviously budgeted earlier, and I know that you've said it's required, but I also remember that we've been doing this on a piecemeal basis. And the question, of course, is why can't we continue with that, or is that a matter of risk management?
It is a matter of risk management. We are required to have an ADA transition plan. Rumor is we had one some point 20 years ago. It has not been updated, and since the act changed, so we are not in compliance with federal law. Mayor Wong, to your point, as we do any capital work, we bring that asset up to ADA standards, whether it's a sidewalk or a park or a trail. So as we are doing capital work, we are applying ADA standards, but we are not in compliance right now in terms of having an ADA transition plan.
And do you know what the ramifications are by not having the plan itself?
You know, given that this is a risk management discussion, Mayor Wong, I'd be happy to address this in a closed session with legal counsel. I don't feel it's appropriate to have that discussion in an open meeting since there is risk involved.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions about the non-department budget or the budget proposals?
No other hands are raised.
Okay.
Sorry, I just have a quick question.
Okay. Councilman Rosen.
I guess on the soil remediation, how does that fall non-departmental as opposed to public works?
I will take this one. So the budget proposal is actually funding for the soil remediation and site characterization work. It is actually proposed as a CIP project. Again, this is work that does not qualify for use of REIT dollars or any of those restricted capital dollars. So this budget proposal truly is just the general government's portion of those projects overall. We've also have some funding for these projects coming from the utility funds for their proportionate share of this work. The work in and of itself will actually be done Public Works Department. But again, the budget proposal lands here because it's a fund transfer to pay for these capital projects.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, City Manager, you can go ahead.
Absolutely. Municipal Court. So we are now on page D38. I'll let everybody flip there. So just a reminder, our municipal court, which is resumed operations at the end of August, is responsible for adjudicating criminal misdemeanor and gross misdemeanor crimes, infractions, and violations per our code in the RCW. For this work plan, in terms of what's budgeted, it is proposed to continue providing municipal court services to the city of Mercer Island and to the city of Newcastle. So your budget is a status quo budget. I will point out your FTE count is relatively flat, and your expenses are also relatively flat, taking into account largely changes in salaries for COLA and benefits. Budget proposals, although this is not shown here, it is actually shown in the Admin Services Department. I did want to point out that we have recommended, I think it's about $20,000 to retain a consultant with council support to explore the option of outsourcing municipal court services. This has shown up in a couple of places historically. It's been in our work plan. It was in part of the management partners financial study as something we might want to look at. It's something we need to analyze, council. So if you would like to do that work, we have included a budget proposal for you. Ally, I believe, Ally, is there anything else that you'd like to add about municipal court services, since that's something that you help coordinate with BO?
No, I think the only thing to remember is that this is, again, it's a separate branch of the government, and they have their own rules and laws that they must follow. The court is not here to make money. The court is here to adjudicate the cases. So it's not something we can really change too much about. We do try and keep the costs down as much as possible, but it's a pretty tight budget.
Are there any questions on the municipal court?
No, nobody's hands are raised.
All right, and just a reminder, I think I've said this probably 6 times already, the budget proposals will all be coming back to you on November 2nd. So you have most certainly another bite at this apple. Okay, moving on to the fire department. And we are now on page D33, as everyone is flipping their pages. So just a reminder, council, as you're looking at your budget pages, you have a brief description at the top. We've included the functional organizational chart as well as the staffing organizational chart. Key themes here, certainly community safety through all the things that the fire department does, planning, training, response, mitigation of emergencies. Certainly the fire department has been impacted and a key player in responding during the pandemic, including modifying nearly all of their protocols to keep themselves safe and the community safe as well. One of the things you'll note in your budget document and in the slides this evening is many of our teams are focusing on succession planning. Councilmember Neese brought this up earlier. We certainly have a number of eligible retirees in both the fire department and police department and in other departments within the city. And we need to continue to work on planning for those retirees. I will note here, council, as you flip to page D34 and D35, this is the first department where you will see a fairly detailed work plan. I mentioned this earlier. In the key themes section, I am not going over every single bullet, just highlighting kind of the top items. So certainly increasing cardiac survival rates, and reducing community risk through fire prevention and public education are key themes for this department. In terms of budget proposals, this is one where you're probably wondering, why did I put it in here? In 2021, we will be bringing a budget amendment to you to implement the Mobile Integrated Health Program, which is supported by King County EMS. This is a budget neutral request. It's just a budget amendment that is coming to you. And so it's not part of your budget yet. It'll be coming in 2021, and we wanted to call it out. Chief Heitman is here on the line, and he can add a few other details. Also, I put a reminder there at the last city council meeting. You did direct me to bring back a budget proposal for further study of contracting for with another entity for fire services. Chief Heitman, is there any other highlights you'd just like to mention about the department work plan, your department for 21-22 before we take questions?
Yes, Council, on the mobile integrated health, we're planning on coming before you in December as part of a study session to give you an in-depth look at what this entails and what we are planning and how we're going to add this service for the citizens. Also, just to highlight as well, one of the things we're looking forward to as the pandemic kind of closes down in the future is getting back to public education. And so we've taken this time, the fire marshal has either designed or improved on lesson plans that we have for the public. So we now have 12 of those that are ready to go. And so we're really looking forward to re-engaging with the council.
Excellent. I should have said earlier, council, again, the summary bar at the top highlights the expenses, relatively flat. What you're seeing is changes tied to COLAs and benefits. The FTE count is proposed to remain the same in 21-22.
Councilmember Neese has a question.
Yeah, thanks. I was wondering, on the revenue and the expenditure side, is there not an expenditure for developing the impact fees, and then is there not a revenue estimate for when they roll in to the forecast?
Actually, you're raising a good point, because I don't believe we went back and added the fire impact fees to the work plan, Councilmember Neese. So that is something that still needs to be done.
Okay.
And what I would suggest is we would probably not include a revenue assumption there until we've actually done that work.
I mean, I think that's fine for an impact fee that has to go towards, capital expenditure anyway.
I will mention, council, we need to update our transportation and our park impact fees. And we typically work with an outside consultant to support us on this work. And so my thinking was, and I apologize, I didn't catch it from the fire services study to the budget, that we'd likely engage a consultant to help us with the entire impact fee program. Thank you for catching that.
Okay, Councilmember Rosenbaum.
Thanks. Jesse, this is more of a general question, but where would increases in PPE expenses be? Is that kind of across the city, or I'm just trying to understand sort of what that looks like for us?
Yeah, it's actually in 2020. It was we received funding from the CARES Act to purchase PPE. Otherwise, it's included in department supply budgets. And Lawan, if I just misstated that, please let me know.
Nope, that's accurate.
Thank you.
Councilmember Reynolds.
Yeah, I have a similar question to what I asked at the consultant the other week. The salary budgets that are here, those are just based on COLA growth rates as opposed to a demographic analysis, looking at who's retiring and who's coming on board. I guess that's a question. Is it?
Lawan, so like you're asking if someone were retired at a higher salary and we replacing them with somebody that's at an entry-level salary, has that been factored in? And it probably hasn't, because I'm not aware of any confirmed retirements, right? What we have is people that are eligible for retirement but may not have announced a retirement yet.
That's correct. We do not have any projected retirements in the next biennium.
So if we're effectively assuming a steady state pool of employees, which it sounds like we largely are, won't the salaries go up besides just the COLAs, but also for length of service
Yes.
payments? And is that reflected?
I misspoke earlier. Thank you for that clarification. Yes, per the bargaining agreement. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. No other hands are raised, Jesse.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chief. Also on public safety, moving on to the police department. So again, council, let's turn our pages. Page D45 is where the police department starts. And I'll point out relatively flat expenses again, similar, and I'll get it right this time, similar comments to previous, where you're seeing increases. It's salary increases per the respective bargaining agreements, COLA and benefit increases largely. FTEs flat for the biennium. Key themes, and we'll have our chief here join us in just a minute. One of the really important conversations we're having right now is around the impacts of light rails, so preparing for growth and change. Certainly, we're continually looking at efficiency and public safety service delivery, and as I've already mentioned, planning for succession. The police department also has a number of staff members eligible for retirement, although some of them have not elected to retire yet. Communication is a top priority, has been, and will continue to be into the next biennium. And also, I think similar to fire, really starting to get back to community safety, outreach and education opportunities, which were pretty significantly impacted by the pandemic. The budget proposal for the police department is to consider adding 2 full-time patrol officers in 2022. And this would be in anticipation of the Sound Transit Light Rail Station opening in 2023. This budget proposal, you may recall, dates back to conversations we had in 19 and even in the early part of this year about do we need more officers when the light rail station opens? So that is why that is here. I am going to turn the floor over. Ed, are you there? Chief Holmes? And he'll share a few more thoughts about the department budget.
All right, good evening, council. For the record, Ed Holmes, your police chief. With me tonight, I have socially distanced from myself is Commander Magnan and Lieutenant Seifert. We will, between the three of us, we'll just highlight a few of the items on our work plan. I'll speak to the camping ordinance and partnerships with area shelters. Provisional Lieutenant Seifert will talk about our training program. Commander Magnan will share some things about accreditation. I will then circle back at the end and speak specifically to this budget proposal and speak to how it relates to preparing for sound transit and even our staffing. So briefly, if I mention the items 1.1 and 1.2 on the work plan, proposals for updating our camping ordinance. I won't spend a ton of time on this because I know this is going to be coming back to the council for a much more thorough and in-depth conversation scheduled for next, quarter one of next year. So the short story is, and again, you'll hear more about it, is our camping ordinance needs to be updated. It is largely outdated and is pretty narrow in focus. So we are looking and interested in having the discussion with the council related to expanding the ordinance and at the same time entering into some relationship, some agreement with area shelters, most likely via some sort of a shelter consortium. So again, you'll hear more about that in quarter one of next year. But two things I think that we need to address, again, the ordinance itself, and then getting some relationship, some agreement with area shelters. So with that, I'll turn it over to Provisional Mike Seifert, our Provisional Lieutenant, to talk about our training.
Good evening, council. Thank you. Talking about training in 2020 has been pretty interesting because not only have we had the COVID come through and pretty much take away all of our training venues and all the people that would normally provide training, we've also had a push for an increased amount of training and in different levels of training where it comes in aspects like de-escalation and anti-bias policing, things that we've always kept up on pretty well. But there has been a push to make sure that we're doing it not only as well as we were doing it before, but taking aspects. So we've been tasked with finding new ways to train, keeping everybody up to date with the state and accreditation mandates. And then we've also had the training venues removed due to not being able to send people out to training. We've been pretty creative in dealing with this and trying to find effective, up-to-date online training that the officers can take. Examples are we've recently found 2 4-hour courses, one that's based on realistic de-escalation and another that's based on an officer's duty to intervene if they observe excessive use of force. We take those trainings online, each officer is able to take that, and then we try to find a venue locally where we can have the officers practice this in a fashion that's more than just sitting in a classroom. We're taking the aspects that are being taught in those classes and bringing them to our range sessions. Doing everything we can to maximize the amount of training. Police officers are an interesting group where sitting in a classroom reading from a book doesn't necessarily translate into the skills that you want them to have when they're working with the public. So we want to make sure that we're taking those, which is what's available to us right now, but then also making sure the skills become something that the officers are physically able to use as at the level they should be expected to. We see that going into 2021 as well, where we're not expecting the venues, the normal training venues that the officers are used to be open. Thank you.
We have questions.
Actually, Mayor Wong, I think we've, Chief Holmes may have one other quick comment before we.
Yeah, one quick point that Chief Holmes has asked me to inform the council about. Good evening, council and Mr. Mayor. Section 2.10 of your packet there specifically talks about accreditation. So we have been accredited agency through WASPIC, which is the Washington Association of Sheriff and Police Chiefs, since 1991. We currently look at 150 standards that the department is based on our policies and the direct action that the officers take out in the field. So we're able to translate the standards that are out there to not only make sure that we're utilizing proper, what's the best way to say this? The proper aspects or the best practices, I'm sorry about that, the best practices, but we're also adhering to both state law and federal law. What they utilize is agencies provide staff members that go to the department that is being accredited, and they go through the policies, they meet with staff, making sure that not only does the policy meet the standard requirements, but also that it's in practice. We are coming up on reaccreditation next year. In the reaccreditation, we're looking at Q3 of next year for that process.
Excellent. Mayor Wong, now we would welcome any questions you might have, unless Chief Holmes had a final wrap-up.
I was just a minute to talk about the budget proposal, if that
right.
works.
Sorry.
Okay. So budget proposal, again, asking for 2 additional officers. If I remind the council, about a year ago, Chief Heitman and I came to the council and highlighted 5 areas of concern that we wanted to focus on as we contemplated the coming of the Sound Transit Light Rail Station. Those 5 quickly were 1, safety for the pedestrians and bicycles, safe and efficient traffic flow, individual and personal safety, timely responses for police and fire, and then minimizing the negative impacts in the town center, surrounding parks and neighborhoods. So when I talk to other chiefs who have transit centers, their response is pretty consistent. Transit centers are a draw for some issues with them. In fact, one local police chief told me last week, he described it as a hub for problems, a hub for calls. So it generates calls. A lot of the concerns he had in his town were around transients. So, and the thing to remember, I suppose, with Mercer Island that's unique is, unlike most of these other transit cities, Mercer Island's transit station will be a bus intercept where everybody has to get off the bus and onto the train. And we know that not everybody who exits the bus is going to get on the train. And a small percentage of those people will create some public safety challenges for us. So I believe we need to create a strong public safety, strong police presence from the onset, set a really clear message that we're there to make sure everybody, pedestrians, bicyclists, bus and train riders, area park users, town center business owners, that everybody is safe, and we're there to help make sure of that. The budget proposal itself is for 2 additional officers. They will be assigned to the bus area, again, surrounding parks, neighborhoods, and the town center. The whole point there would be to get some consistency with these officers, so you don't have different officers rotating through, but rather you have some consistent liaison officers who can liaison between all the interested stakeholders. If we don't get these positions funded, I'll be forced to reassign officers from existing duties to this area because we know there's going to be some challenges there. My concerns with reassigning officers to the Sound Transit area really have to do with staffing, and we don't know what our staffing level is going to be like in 2023. I'm genuinely concerned about our ability to maintain staffing levels, not to mention reassigning officers. For example, right now, we're down 7 officers. And by down, this is what I mean. We have 1 officer is on field training. So he's not a solo officer, he's paired up with another officer. We have 3 waiting to get in the academy. We have 1 on military leave, been on military leave all year. 1 is out on FMLA, and we have 1 vacancy that we're working hard to fill. So we've been ordering officers in on overtime. We've been reassigning some detectives to cover the road. And I'm really concerned because next summer we we forecast being down 8 officers. Again, that's through some expected retirements and the way it takes so long to get people trained. So as you know, it takes 12 months, if we're lucky, from the time we hire an officer to the time that officer is a solo officer. So we would need to hire these 2 new officers, I'd say January of 22, to have them ready and online solo officers in 2023. Now look, there's a number of things that are still unknown about this bus intercept, but there's a few things that we do know. We know that there will be an increase in public safety issues that we need to address. We know that there's significant community concerns with this bus intercept coming. And we know that if we wait till the train gets here to see if there's issues and problems, it'll be too late to hire those officers. Approving these new officers, I believe, is the safe and responsible thing to do. If we need them, they're here at the ready. Worst case, we don't need them. They will simply, if that's the case, they will simply get reabsorbed back into our regular patrol staffing. On average, over the last 25 years, we hire 2 new officers a year on average. So the additional 2 new officers, if they're not needed, and I'm not suggesting that be the case, but worst case, they're not needed, they would simply get reabsorbed into the patrol mix. So that's why I've included that budget proposal in this year's budget. Again, needing to act on this in 2022 to get them ready by 23. And I'm happy to entertain any questions you may have.
And Chief, can you just also explain briefly, we're not asking to fund 24-hour shifts. These are literally 2 officers and how they might be utilized over a 7-day week?
Yeah, right now we're looking at, so we have 4 squads of officers. There's 2 day shift squads, 2 night shift squads. So we would essentially add one of these officers to squad 1 and the other officer to squad 2. So squad 1 works Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, every other Wednesday. And squad 2 is every other Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So we'd have 7-day a week, because I know there's activity on the weekends, and we would simply bump up our minimum staffing on day shift up by 1. So squad 1 would have an extra officer, squad 2 would have an extra officer assigned to them. So that way we can get maximum coverage for the train station. And again, those 2 officers would develop relationships with all the interested stakeholders, and there'd be consistency in having those officers there. If there's evening, they could flex some hours, or I suppose if they had to cover some special events, if you have Mariner games or Seahawk games, again, having 7-day a week coverage, I think, is responsible. And as I mentioned a moment ago, there's a number of unknowns still with this train station. So I think having these officers at the ready affords us some flexibility, and I think it's the prudent thing to do.
Thank you. Councilmember Jacobson.
Yes, Chief, I have a couple of questions. Question number 1 is, how do you identify and implement best practices for policing in your department?
Well, Commander Magnan had mentioned, we are accredited through the state. There's, I think, he said 150, I thought it was a little bit more, standards that we have to comply with to keep our accreditation standards. So we look very closely at those standards. Do we meet them? And as Commander Magnan mentioned, since I believe 1991, we have a pretty long and rich history of being contemporary in our practices. We also use the services of a company called Lexipol, and they write police policies, and we subscribe to Lexipol. When I first became the chief now, I guess 14 and plus years ago, the one question I had for the former chief was, hey, what about policies and procedures? There's this company called Lexipol. What do you think? I explained to him that Lexipol has a staff of attorneys. They look at state law. They look at recent court rulings for different states, and specifically here for us in Washington State. So they're always looking at developing case law, changes in the legislature makes during legislative session, and they keep our policies contemporary. He had told me, he says, you know, Ed, that's the one thing that kept me up at night is as soon as one of my written policies, as soon as the ink dries, it might well be outdated. And unless we have staff of attorneys looking at this constantly, we could well be out of compliance in some areas. And so this company, Lexipol, again, they push out policies. We don't have to immediately adopt them. There's once in a while, I'll make a small change, but not very often. And one of the other benefits, Councilmember Jacobson, is they also issue training bulletins. So they not only push out policies, but they also have training bulletins, and we do daily training bulletins and then tests on the policies. So it ensures that we have contemporary policy and that the officers are trained on those policies. So I feel confident that we're contemporary in our policies, our practices, and then being accredited helps as well.
My second question is that we earlier talked about reforming police procedures and these kinds of things. And you mentioned in the course of that city council discussion, or maybe several of them, that you had instituted a bias training in your department some time ago. And is that going to continue on for the foreseeable future?
Absolutely. That's something, and I'm quite sure you're all aware of this, but I have a very strong interest in this topic and quite a bit of passion behind that. And I continue to be very actively involved, not just locally, but regionally as well, in this notion of, again, equity, equality, inclusion. How do we do our job? How do we do it better? How do we make sure that people who interact with the police department feel like they've been treated with dignity and respect? So that is something we and I specifically, but we look at often. And yes, we do annual training that will absolutely continue.
And one final question, if Mayor Wong doesn't put me in jail for asking a third one, is does diversity and inclusion, is that part of your hiring process, or how do you approach that?
We have a number of sort of ways to screen for issues. If there are issues that are concerning in that area, our background investigators screen those out. Part of the process, there's a new tool we use. We're just using it now. It's a new tool to screen for biases, racial discrimination type, racism type of biases. And then in the chief's interviews, those are discussions we have, just real open, honest conversations around their ideas of policing. I'll ask specifically times about race and their ideas around that. So as I've said before, I think probably the most important decision I make, or at least certainly one of them, but maybe the most important decision I make is who do I bring in? Who do we bring into this department to represent law enforcement, represent you, represent this community in a profession that there's not room for mistakes in that. So we take that really seriously.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rosenbaum.
Did the training academy have any, were the schedule impacted at all by COVID this year?
They have been, and I think I'll have Acting Lieutenant Seifert, he'll make mention of that because he oversees that for us.
Question in regards to the academy being affected by COVID. Yeah, we've had significant setbacks. So when COVID first started having restrictions in March, the academy closed down completely for about 4 to 6 weeks. We had the officer who the chief recently spoke about being currently on field training. He was in the academy at the time. So his academy graduation was bumped from about 2 months from when we originally expected to have him back on the island here. Since then, they've had to stagger out classes because they're doing classes where basically the students come in a few days a week, and then a few days a week they do the rest of the training online. In order to facilitate how many students they can hold at the academy, they've had to stagger out graduations before when they would let new students and new classes begin. So one of our students that's waiting to get in the academy now was supposed to start about 6 weeks ago, and now he's scheduled to start in, I believe it's the 2nd or 3rd of November. The other students that we have that are waiting to get into the academy, their start date is until the 2nd of December. So we're seeing a huge lag in the time it takes to get the officers into the academy. And we're not quite set on graduation dates, not knowing how long it'll take them to complete the 720 hours of instruction they need to complete there.
So I'm assuming that's just ratcheting up that number of officers that we're down even further.
Yeah, it basically extends for us, it extends the length between the time of hire to when that officer can become a solo officer and actually count it as an officer that we can utilize here independently without having to have a training officer with them.
Okay. And Chief, could you talk about the cut to investigations and special programs? Sorry, page D46.
Yes, and I think I missed your question. I'm really sorry. What was the question?
If you could just talk to that cut, looks like a 24% cut to investigations and special programs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there was an inadvertent reassignment of my detective sergeant to patrol. So there was, like I say, it's a small little mistake. We have a vacancy in patrol right now of a sergeant who retired. So I think that's probably how it got misdirected back to patrol. The bottom line budget numbers are correct. There's just one FTE who should have been reflected in the Special Investigations Program, but inadvertently got charged to patrol.
Got it. Thank you.
Good catch, Councilmember Rosenbaum. So just to confirm, there's an error in your budget document that will be fixed in the final budget, but the bottom line number is correct.
Chief, I have a question for you. Given the uncertainty regarding the impact of the light rail station, can you explain why your proposal, or why the budget proposal is for 2 officers? I mean, with 1 officer until we know more, would that help? And obviously that would involve probably assigning some of your current officers, but can you just speak to that possibility?
Yeah, I think, as one of the things that is important to us is that we make a really strong officer presence early on from the onset. And as I mentioned, we have those 2-day shifts. And so to be able to do this effectively, we would have, and they work 12-hour shifts, so from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And I suppose there could be some flexibility if we needed that, but from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Sunday through Saturday, we would have coverage there. The train and the buses, they continue on the weekends. And so I don't want weekends to become a problem. I don't, if it's a 8-hour-a-day officer, Monday through Friday for 8 hours, we'll miss the morning, parts of the morning rush hour or parts of the evening rush hour or both. So I think to get maximum coverage for 12 hours, we have Sunday, squad 1 and squad 2 with the additional officer assigned to each squad. That gives us 7 days a week coverage for 12 hours a day. And I think, as I've seen in other areas in the past, the initial presence being really strong statement from the beginning, I think is what we need. I think people are going to need to be reassured that we take this seriously. I mentioned before hearing significant community input on this topic. There's a lot of anxiety out there. And I think, it's far easier to scale back than to try to ramp up. You just heard Lieutenant Seifert talk about the length of time with these officers to get them up and trained. And so I worry about that. I worry about that a lot. So I think, I just feel this is a prudent thing to do. And we have that fallback plan. If I'm way off and it turns out to be not a big issue, we would just certainly absorb those officers back into the regular patrol model.
Great. Thank you. Councilmember Neese.
Chief, I wanted to ask, if you have somebody on patrol 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., so it's a 12-hour shift in the transit center, sometimes it's nice to have an anchor for a targeted position like that. Do you have any thoughts about if it would make sense to have a very small light-duty community precinct that could be set up in the former Tully site that could just act as an anchor for that kind of emphasis? And, have you talked or thought about that at all?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. Yes, the initial discussions have taken place on that very topic. I'm not sure if it was you who initially brought that to my attention as an idea. It wasn't mine, it was somebody's idea. And right away I thought, yeah, I like that. It does give an anchor, as you say, and it's right there. It's right next to it. The city currently owns that building. I don't see it as something that would need a ton of renovation. It's not a major remodel project. It could just serve as a resource, a community resource, have the officers assigned to that. I'm very supportive of that. I really like that idea. I just haven't given it enough thought to speak to it articulately, but I really appreciate the question. Really like that idea.
Well, I'd love to hear more as you continue to think about that and how this council supports those additional officers, thinking through how providing an anchor in town center, an anchor around the transit operations, even a place just to physically park a police car and then have a base. I would be supportive of that as well.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Deputy Mayor Weicker.
Hi, Chief. I just wanted to give you a minute to give us an update on the emergency management position and school resource officer and how critical those 2 positions are, even with school not necessarily being in session, how you're able to adjust and pivot that work.
Sure. So I'll start with the emergency management position I think you mentioned. I think we've seen that position as being invaluable, especially during this pandemic, having one key person, point person to manage, certainly at the beginning, and it's a huge team effort, so I'm not suggesting otherwise. I want to be clear on that. But having one person responsible for just being the point of contact initially and then throughout this pandemic has been huge. Smaller things, windstorms. I know a certain somebody I'm talking to right now lost power today. And so I realize that's a small thing, but those small things can quickly become bigger things. And if we need warming centers or in the summer cooling centers, having one person responsible for all that just makes a whole lot of sense. And our emergency manager, who also is our crime prevention officer and coordinates a million things, has been really busy, and it's certainly a key position. Shifting to the school resource officer, the position itself, and I just want to make a couple comments on the whole school resource officer program. I think all of you know I was our first SRO in 1996, and sort of from that year on, when I hear discussions around, gee, should we do away with SRO programs? I hear that in other cities, in other states. It really makes me sad because at least on Mercer Island, I'll speak to our school resource officer program. One of the overarching goals, and it's in your budget book here, one of the overarching goals of the SRO program is to keep kids out of the criminal justice system. I worked in the juvenile justice system before coming here. I was a counselor with kids who were locked up. That if we can avoid that track for kids, absolutely. Years ago, when we started the position, one of the school board members asked, why do you call it a school resource officer? Why don't you just call it a police officer in the school? And really, the title means something. That SRO is a resource, truly a resource. I remember many times when I was asked, hypothetical, what if, Officer Holmes, I told you that this was happening, or I was thinking about that, or counselors would ask me, hey, what if I told you I had a kid who was, in this sort of a space with his or her thinking, what might happen? And just being able to share the world of criminal justice that they want to stay out of proved really, really helpful. So our school resource officer is assigned to the detective section. The SRO investigates cases. If a juvenile is a suspect, victim, witness in crimes, the SRO gets involved. But again, that certainly doesn't suggest that that's what they want to do. They really do try to help have kids avoid making bad decisions. You wear the hat of a counselor. Yes, you're a police officer, but it's a unique position. We interview very carefully for that position. I think I have a number of officers who are not interested, and that's probably a wise thing to recognize that might not be a great fit for them. So it's one of those positions. It takes, I could say it about any position, but this one in particular, certainly the right disposition. And so I just have strong feelings that it's a very, very beneficial program. If the SRO arrests one kid a year, maybe, but maybe not even that. It really is very heavily weighted on the opposite side of that ledger of really trying to just be that resource for kids. And I'm very thankful that the council continues to support that we work in conjunction with, arm in arm with the school district and the counselors and the parents. We get a lot of parents just, they're at a loss. Who do you call? Well, call our school resource officer. The officer is very, very helpful, very knowledgeable, and it's an outstanding program, and I appreciate the support.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Rosenbaum, your hand is up. Okay. City Manager, the hour is getting late. I'm just going to suggest that maybe you consider doing, and obviously this is an ongoing discussion about the budget, so I don't know what if we just cover the city attorney's office, the manager's office, and finance?
Sure.
And then we can talk about next steps.
Yep. That works for me. I'm assuming we were done with all the questions then on police, yes?
Yes, nobody else.
All right. Moving on to the city attorney's office. Again, in the upper right-hand part of your screen there, you see the expenses actually declining in 21 and 22 just a bit, and the FTE count going down by 1. As a reminder, council, we previously, all the way back into 2019, had 2 city attorneys. We had a city attorney full-time and assistant city attorney full-time. Since then, we have been using outside legal counsel to support our legal work plan, and we've been pleased with the arrangement. So our recommendation is to continue that for the upcoming biennium. I think one of the advantages is, legal matters range from A to Z, and using outside legal counsel to support us allows us to hire firms with a specialty in the specific area. By the way, we're on page D9, I forgot to mention that. So key themes, certainly for our city attorney's office in the coming biennium, defending the 2017 settlement agreement Sound Transit. A reminder, our city attorney provides support to just about everything we do in the city on some level. A lot of our contract review work and things like that has been outsourced at this point to outside legal counsel. When called to do so, our city attorney represents us in civil litigation matters and prosecution of criminal citations through the municipal court and public defender and prosecutor. And our city attorney's office, particularly our paralegal, manages our public records request in partnership with the city clerk's office. We have no budget proposals in the city attorney's office. Bo, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Real quickly, the city attorney's office doesn't have any budget proposals, but our focus is going to be in ensuring that the city is receiving the best possible legal representation in litigation. And we'll continue to manage carefully how we meet staff's need for legal assistance to help them do their work, comparing that with the cost of the new model in obtaining legal work, a la carte from outside counsel based on needed expertise. So that will be our focus for the biennium.
Councilmember Jacobson.
Yeah, let me get myself back up here. I'd commend both the city manager and city attorney. I think this is a very wise and very forward-looking way of using legal services. And as some of you know, I'm a lawyer, and I also spent 25 years as the only lawyer in our company's organization. I was not the general counsel, but in effect, I was doing what Bio was doing. That was hiring people who had the expertise to quickly and more effectively than I deal with a problem, and then supervise the work that was done. So I think the model is excellent, and I think it is unrealistic to expect any attorney to know everything from tax questions to land use kinds of things in infinite detail. So I think we're absolutely on the right track with this. I think it allows our city attorney to focus on, I think, fewer things to do than would otherwise be the case, which improves the quality of what he has to do if his life's anything like mine was. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask city manager, I guess also Beal, the $310,000, is that just a placeholder, or is there any basis for that number? This is for contractual services.
That's a projection, Mayor Wong. And, one of the benefits of using outside legal counsel is in years where we have fewer issues, you will see that line item underspent. Unfortunately, on years when we have more legal matters to address, we may be spending more than that. So it's a projection.
Okay, all right, thank you. I don't see any other questions, so.
All right.
To the next department.
City Manager's Office, page D15. I'll just remind you at the top, the FTE count, exclude excludes the department heads. They are counted as FTEs in their respective departments. So that's why that number is probably lower than what you thought. Budget is down a little bit. This really has to do with reassigning staff, to be honest. Allie Speets, for example, is our chief of administration. She's taken on multiple departments. She was previously funded, I think, almost entirely out of the city manager's budget, but we've tied her salary back to other functions as an example. Key themes, none of this comes as a surprise to you. You know, my job, our department's job is leadership and support to the city council. Certainly, as has been the case in 2020, we anticipate heading into 2021. I am the key decision maker when it comes to responding to citywide pandemic-related issues, although thankfully there's a fantastic team and an emergency manager that handles most of that for me, but I'm certainly engaged. This should have been probably number 2 here, which is stabilizing the organization. We have been through so much change. That is a key focus. If you look at the work plan that I've laid out, I've identified a number of very specific things we'll be working on. And succession planning, really looking across multiple departments. How do we stabilize in anticipation of a number of upcoming retirements? And then certainly council, as is the case now, you have special projects that get assigned during the biennium. I'm currently supporting work on the thrift shop remodel and former Tully's property as we work to decide what that may become. No budget proposals in the city manager's office. Allie's in the wings here. Did you want to say anything else about CM's office? The work plan is long.
It's there and it's detailed. I think the only thing I just wanted to comment on is that we do have the recreation transition team doing a recovery plan for the community center and recreation services, and also the thrift shop operations recovery plan. And that does take a chunk of the city manager's office time. And then also related to long-term financial strategies, there is the Luther Burbank maintenance and operation levy that ends in 2023. And then of course, long-term financing for the Youth and Family Services Department. So I think those are some pretty big initiatives.
Any questions, council?
We have a council member, Rosenbaum.
Thanks, Tracy. I was just wondering if you could talk about how much wiggle room there is in some of your planning here in terms of additional city council special projects. You know, we've added a lot this year, and I'm just sort of curious going forward.
Yeah. Wiggle room. That's a tough one, Councilmember Rosenbaum. We intentionally laid out our work plan items as specifically as we could, and I would say we're pretty packed right now from January 1, 2021 to December 2022. And I provided that detail so you can see what the roadmap looks like. We've gone over it a few times. We tried to set reasonable expectations for ourselves where there's a deadline so that we can actually meet it. So what I would ask is if major work items are added, we need to then go back and look at this document and ask ourselves, can we add that item without taking something else off? Maybe, if it's small, maybe not. For example, Councilmember Neese just flagged for me that we had omitted the fire impact fees. That is something that I do feel we can add to the other impact fee work, although I may have to modify the budget proposal amount to get that done. So that's a non-answer.
That's okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, no other questions.
All right. Keep going. Sorry, there's a lag when I click over. There we go. All right, moving on to finance, and we are on page D28 now. Okay. If you have not read the work plans, council, I do suggest you take a deep dive into the finance department work plan. Some of these items will be very familiar to you. A lot of the policy work you actually called out and prioritized in 2020 as part of your planning session. And we had hopes and dreams at that point that the policy work would be done this year and rolled into this budget document. It was not the case. So we have included it in the finance, all those policies in the finance work plan with some specificity. I will remind you that these are all council policies, so they'll be coming back to you. So as you think about the staff work plan, also think about your work plan. This material has to come back to you. Another, when you've asked me, what tools do you need to perform better? Our financial software is out of date. It hasn't been updated since I think 2010. It's really restricting our ability to do a lot of things like converting to a monthly financial report, which I would love, I think you would love. So that is a high priority for us. We have had a lot of turnover in the finance department due to retirements. And we have some really talented staff that we have retained. So now we need to get them cross-trained and learning more about the city. It was a tough year to do that. And of course, a reminder that the finance department supports every function in the city. They're a pretty busy group and at times spread really, really thin. And I already previewed at the beginning, we don't love this budget document format anymore. So we are hoping, as time allows, that by the time we see you 2 years from now, this document will be updated. You've got a couple budget proposals in the finance department, the software, which I just mentioned, and then a financial analyst, which Matt will join here and talk a little bit more about. So Matt.
Thank you, Jesse. That pretty much covers we have a really deep work plan with projects to complete over the next 24 months. But what our work plan doesn't convey is the day-to-day work that the department does to facilitate the city council's work and every other department's delivery of public business services. We're an internal service department and our work touches every department. So we are proposing in the budget process adding a new financial analyst that will focus on the capital program and the utility funds. By adding this position, we think that it will position the department from being reactive to being providing more proactive analysis on the city's fiscal and capital resources. So over the next year, we're going to focus on creating redundancy among our staff for the many critical workflows that take place within the department. We have really talented staff, and through this cross-training effort, we will spread the know-how and likely find ways to be more effective. So in 2022, we would look to recruit for the financial analyst position should council choose to fund it. And then, as Jesse mentioned, our department's Achilles heel is really financial management software. It actually dates back to 2006. And this software does not integrate with any of the other cities' business software systems, meaning that we continue to rely on multiple manual processes to update the financial information. So this is an enterprise-wide software. It affects every city operation, and our overall goal would be to upgrade or change this software to provide financial information in a more timely manner. And this is a somewhat time-sensitive request for the finance department because we need to do this work in an off year of the city's biennial budget process, which would be 2021.
Okay. Councilmember Rosenbaum, your hand is still up. Is that from?
Question.
Yes.
Matt, can you just elaborate on that a little bit? Because on slide 54 it says upgrade financial management system, and then you just talked about the budget proposal. Are those separate systems?
Nope, that's the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, the financial management system may be couched elsewhere in the budget document as the enterprise resource planning software. But that essentially is an elaborate way of saying our financial accounting software.
And we'll screen for that and get the terminology consistent.
Okay, so key theme 1 is currently not funded.
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Jacobson.
Matt, what would be the cost of 1.6? The budget proposal, purchase and implement the enterprise resource planning software?
Right now, we have a capital project in the current capital improvement program that we'll discuss next week that looks to fund the scoping effort, provides resources for staff to bring on a consultant, and essentially scope out what kind of software we actually need based on the services that we need the software to provide and the other software systems that the city currently has. So we want to do a request for qualifications. And once we have that information, we'll have a better understanding of what is out there in the market and what would be a good fit for us. Right now, we've budgeted about $200,000 to $250,000 for this purchase. This is enterprise-wide, and this is what, after a cursory review, this is what these systems cost.
Is it something that MRSC, if I've got the acronym correct, can help us with in terms of our baby steps in this process?
Yeah.
Potentially, yes.
There's also a local consultant that we haven't worked with yet, but Mike Bailey, you may recall Mike from MRSC. He had used them previously and suggested that they would be a good resource for us to go out and help us identify software programs. As you can imagine, there's systems that are 4 times more expensive than that. We're not working off of that budget, so we're trying to keep it reasonable.
Thank you, Jesse.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Weicker.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. I just wanted to follow up and let you expand on the fact that the utilities could pay for part of that and see how quickly you could kind of hit the ground running to implement it, and mention any cybersecurity risks that might be associated with not taking on this project.
Thank you, Council Member. We're looking to spread these costs out also across fiscal years based on what we think is the realistic timeline we're going to be able to do this work. And we're also looking to spread it out across funds. So the financial analyst position is spread out across the general fund and the utility funds. And same thing with the financial management software. We're going to spread that out.
Deputy Mayor Weicker, if I could just jump in here. Keeping our systems current certainly helps with security of our technology. I really prefer not to talk about cybersecurity risks in an open public meeting. It usually is an invitation for, I will say you can't see, but Alfredo, our IT manager, is right across from me. And I know he will tell you that the city's in a very good position.
Great. Okay, so I was referring more to the risks around not doing this software, given that it's so old and so many parts of the city touch this unique function. So the benefit of doing it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, it's a really outdated platform, and we're struggling, to be honest with you.
Yes, I'll leave it at that.
Ditto. Thanks.
Well, no other questions on that department. I guess I did. You want to try to do one more? Just the administrative, certain.
I think
some people shaking their heads no. Perhaps we'll just call it right now.
You lightweights, it's 9:20. Come on.
Weren't we going to try to get to slide number 60?
Yeah, I think we have 2 more departments: admin services and CPD.
All right.
You want to keep?
Let's try it. Okay.
Let's keep pushing.
Keep pushing.
Sorry, Craig. Okay, admin services. New department, if you will, combination of a lot of other divisions that resulted from a host of changes that have happened all the way back to 2019. So this is where centralized customer service lands, HR, payroll, citywide communications, IT, website administration, and risk management, which risk management is our coordination with WCIA and other things. Broad themes, this team, much like finance, is supporting a whole host of services citywide. This is a new team. Again, Allie's overseeing this. One of our big projects for this coming year is a master fee schedule, which we don't have that tool here at the city yet, but we will. It'll be great. all of our fees in one spot. So we update it annually, including some fees that aren't normally coming to you. So that's something that she'll be working on. Again, this team oversees tech and GIS. We are launching, based on our experiences with the EOC call center, a centralized customer service team. And this is where you see additional FTEs on the admin services side of the house. Phones right now, or before the EOC call center stood up, it was really difficult for a customer to know who to call and when. They now funnel into a central phone system. We're able to handle about 50% of the calls and emails without passing them on. We're still learning and growing that function. And also, certainly, admin services is overseeing citywide communications, including this communications manager, social media, and all that good stuff. By the way, I'm on page D2. I'm gonna let Allie jump in here. She'll probably want to talk a little bit. She knows you're tired about key work plan items, and this department has a whole long list of budget proposals.
Thank you, Jesse. Good evening, council. So I just want to highlight a couple of things on our work plan for the coming biennium. As Jesse spoke about, our exciting new initiative is for our the city's first centralized customer service team that we can remember. So the Emergency Operations Center, we created a call center and we established that when the pandemic hit. And it's worked really well for managing incoming phone calls and emails. Our goal is that this team continues to be the front line for customer interactions, which will alleviate multiple staff teams from working on the same requests. We'll also have the capability to track requests that come in that do not go to our public works or park maintenance teams for an actual service request. The system that we're looking at will also allow staff to see what past interactions other staff have had with customers. So the other project that we're looking forward to, which Jesse spoke about, is the master fee schedule for the city. We'll take all of our fee schedules that we currently have, including land use and building permits, business licensing, public records, impact fees, and we may include additional things such as the solid waste fees from Recology and animal licensing fees. We'll put them all in one spot, make it really easy for people to find it, and then make it really simple to update. We have a number of budget proposals for the biennium, the largest of which is the classification and compensation study. We haven't done a study like this in over 20 years. So this proposal includes hiring a consultant to examine and evaluate the city's current salary schedule for non-represented employees, and then help us develop a classification system for all positions. We're planning to start this work at the very beginning of 2021 and hope to have the process completed by the end of the year. Additional budget proposals include the community satisfaction survey, or our biennial public opinion survey. We usually conduct that every other year in the budget year. We did not do it this year, so we'd like to get back on track and do that again in 2022. We also want to continue cultural competency training for city staff, city council members, and boards and commission members. So we've asked for funding in both years for that. We also have the municipal court service delivery options budget proposal that Jesse spoke about during the municipal court budget. And then finally, one item to note is that we're removing the request for the customer relationship management software, as we've been able to move forward with a company and use CARES Act funding to pay for this. Available for any questions.
Questions on admin services?
Yeah, sorry, this is Lisa. I did have some questions. Allie, on all of the items that you're requesting for funding, are those all able to be accomplished virtually? So not impacted by any potential restrictions associated with COVID?
Yes, I mean, I think that, yeah, I don't see any reason why they couldn't be. Any training that we can do right now, most trainers have switched to the virtual platform. We can work with a consultant for the different studies and the surveys virtually. So I don't see any reason why we couldn't start these and possibly complete them in a virtual environment.
Okay, thanks. I mean, that's what I thought. I just was wondering if there was anything specific about any of them, but thank you.
By the way, I should mention the class comp study was on our work plan for 2020. We got as far as issuing the RFP and receiving proposals at about the time of the pandemic. We had not funded the work yet. We were planning to come back to you. So that is another work plan item that's carried over to 2021. I do think it merits doing at this point. I'm glad we didn't do it last year because so much changed. So this would be much better timing as it worked out.
Councilmember Jacobson.
I seem to recall that responsibility for the oversight of YFS was moved to administrative services. And if A, is that recollection correct? And B, how does it interact with the materials that have been presented here? Because I don't see anything about it.
We've decided to keep YFS as its own department.
In the budget, in the budget.
That's
In the
right.
budget, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So they are not necessarily part of admin services, report to me.
I would also say that I'm constantly amazed that the things that are given to Ally to do get done without any pain and suffering or any fuss. So whatever your magic is, you know, you ought to be training others in it. So thanks for all you do.
Thank you, Councilmember Jacobson.
Other questions?
I don't see any other questions.
All right. Moving on. Thank you, Ally. Oh, this darn screen. Okay. Community Planning and Development Department. Councilmember Reynolds, we are at the home stretch. I know you have a really long workday tomorrow. I will mention, Council, we prepared the budget before interim planning director Jeff Thomas was hired. And so when he joined us, he said, you know, I think I'd like to do a few things differently. So fair enough. Tonight, and I'll have him join in here in just a minute. He'll kind of hit the highlights of what he might be proposing to change. So big themes for Community Planning and Development Department. Certainly one of the departments heavily impacted by the pandemic. Permit revenues are down. We did implement a number of workforce reductions. We are struggling right now because permit reviews are taking a long time. So one of the things Jeff is working on, and he's already started, he's got his oar in the water and is rowing furiously, is on permit fees and cost recovery. We had called out kind of a pretty big comprehensive assessment. He's going to be recommending something a little more straightforward. Key theme here is certainly stabilizing the department, maintaining our basic service levels, and planning for succession as well. You've heard me mention that a few times now. At your direction, Council, you know, the planning department does participate in long-range planning, policy-making activities. Much of that work plan is set by you. And this was part of your 2020 council priorities, which was establishing an economic development program. So we've carried that forward here. It's shown as a budget proposal. And I think this would be a good time for Jeff to take in. I will mention, Jeff, if you're there, Jeff is at home with a power outage. He's been running off a battery this whole time. So if he disappears, it's because his battery died. But I'll stop talking now so we can get you here. And did we already lose him? No. Let's see.
Hi, good evening.
There we go.
Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm not showing up there on the screen. It might not make a difference because I am almost sitting in the dark. I've got the camping flashlights and the battery-powered camping lantern out, and I've always tried to be creative in my career, but kind of having the camping with council idea didn't occur to me until reality hit about 5 o'clock this afternoon. So thanks for the opportunity here to speak for just a few minutes before we wrap up this evening. I did want to just make a couple of general comments on things that Jesse hit on in the slides. The first one is that, you know, in just arriving a few short weeks ago and having the opportunity to assess, do a very preliminary assessment on the department, the work program, the needs, and then taking a look at the budget that Jesse and Luan, I'm sure, and others put together, which actually was a really good swing at trying to frame up the next biennium. I really view, you know, the rest of this year, 2020, and then 2021 as an opportunity to clean up and catch up and prepare for what's going to be in front of the department for the couple of years following with the periodic update to the comprehensive plan. So again, you know, 2021, we're going to be mopping some outstanding items up. We've got to get moving on a lot of those things that are spoken to in the work plan in your document related to stabilizing the department, doing a little bit of work on the organizational structure, and really prioritizing and getting the highest value return on our human resource that we have in the department to provide the full range of services that we need to, both related to activities related to permits and permit revenues, as well as general funded activities. So with that, I would like to add a little bit further. The permit revenue and our services related to permit reviews and inspections is going to be really key. As Jesse mentioned, we've already started working on that. I really didn't feel we could afford to wait very far into 2021. So we're looking at a couple of opportunities that will allow us to hopefully bring amendments to our 2021 permit fee schedule to the City Council in November for consideration that will help the department and the city get out of the gate right at the beginning of 2021. And then we'll have the opportunity to start putting a good data set together of tracking our time and tracking how much it really costs to do some of the work that unfortunately hasn't been tracked really well, if at all, up to date, to date. So that will help us get out in front here right out of the gate at the first of 2021 to get in front of what I think has been a little bit of a long-standing problem. To help match the revenue recouping from our work in those areas to the cost recovery objectives that were put forward, I believe just last year perhaps by City Council, and to also make sure that we're maintaining the appropriate level of service to our customers. So with that, I'll move into the actual slide that's in front of us here on the screen. We do have a couple of budget proposals for next year. Jesse mentioned the Economic Development Program, which I believe the plan would be to move that over to the Community Planning and Development Department, and move that effort forward for the city. The other FTE that's being proposed, which would be a general fund position, is the Senior Policy Analyst. That's a position that would work really on some of the general fund activities, not the on the development side of the house, to help us clean up some outstanding work program items from this year, and also help us work on that preparation for what's going to be a somewhat extensive process with the periodic update to the comprehensive plan. So I think we'd like to try and get done worst case scenario right at the beginning of 2024. So that's somewhere between an 18 and a 21 or 24 month process. We've got a couple of other things here: town center retail analysis and code update, or code updates as necessary, I suppose, related to the moratorium that has been enacted here. I'm working on that currently, actually, in trying to frame that up so that we can come back and have a short conversation with council about that before the end of the year here in 2020. I think the impact fee study was mentioned in one of the departments here in the last several short period of time. So that will move forward as well. That's a 2022 item for us. And then I've referenced the development and land use fee study already here in my few minutes, and trying to get out in front of that a little bit in doing some simplified maneuvers that we're going to be able to discuss as a group here in short order as well. So with that, I'll conclude my comments there. Jesse, if you have anything else to add, or I'd be happy to try and answer any questions the council may have.
Just a little color commentary on the last three items. The town center retail analysis and code update work, that's a placeholder, council. You may or may not need those resources depending on the outcome of our moratorium work, which is in process and scheduled to be back in front of you, December, January timeframe. So that's, I think it's important to set some funds aside depending on how the direction we go. Earlier tonight, Councilmember Neese reminded me about the fire impact fees. So what I will be doing when we come back on November 2nd is increasing the number you see there for impact fee work. I will mention that this body of work is shown in the Community Planning and Development Department, but actually, which technically they do steward the impact fees. However, finance, city attorney's office, city manager, and admin services, public works, parks, everybody's usually involved in this work at some level, and certainly fire will now be as well. And then the land use fee study, again, this may or may not be needed. So these are some placeholders, and I know you guys are tired, so I will stop there, and Jeff from his power outage house would be happy to field questions if you have any.
I'm seeing questions right now, so this might be a good time to stop, and then I guess your manager, if you want to well, we have a Councilmember Neese.
I just want to plant the seed. If there's a way for the cost of development of impact fees to be put into the impact fee, can we look at that? We spend a good amount of money doing it. I don't know if we can build that into the fee.
So the cost to do the periodic update work, is that what you're referencing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. That's something I'd be happy to ask.
Thanks.
So city manager, do you want to just sort of describe next steps?
I don't think you guys want to hear anything else from me tonight. Oh. I can see you're all tired. Just a reminder, we'll be back here in a week. You have a regular council meeting, you have a handful of other items on the agenda, and then we will pick back up where we left off. I saved the three more complex departments for next week. So the Recreation Transition Team, YFS, and Public Works / Operations. And then we will turn our attention to the capital improvement program. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that section of your binder, which is quite extensive, please do so by Tuesday. And thank you for hanging in there tonight. This was great.
Great. Well, I think on behalf of the City Council, I can certainly extend our appreciation to all the work that you've done, City Manager, and also the staff, and Matt and Luan, and just everybody for putting this together. And obviously, this discussion is going to continue on for the next couple of meetings. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be at the next meeting, and so I just let you know. And so Deputy Mayor Weicker will be chairing the meeting. And so there being no other business coming before the council, time is now 9:42 p.m. Again, please stay seated until the city staff terminates the broadcast. So good evening and stay safe and healthy.